Let's see if this works. All right, so this is the episode of the Growing with Fishes podcast. Shoot, there we go. Now we got everyone's things going. I think that we're live. I think that we're streaming. YouTube totally jacked everything up. So let's go.
So meth is still a huge problem in this country.
Here we go. Trying to double check the stream. Think we're live. Yay, we got it to work. Cool. So we are good now, I think. Possibly, maybe. Anyone? So I'm checking chat. Let me know if anything sounds weird.
Anyone want to verify us?
Anything? Yeah, I think everything's going good based on chat. So I think we're good. You're live. Everything sounds good, guys. Good. I apologize. YouTube decided this morning to change everything, and I didn't realize it till about an hour and a half before the show. So it took a while to work out all the kinks and get everyone into a chat room that was functional with everyone's microphones again. So I think we managed to do it, and I appreciate everyone's patience. I know we started 15 minutes late, so let's introduce everyone. First, thank you so much, Dale, for your patience and with us all on that. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody where you're from?
Hey, I'm Dale Hunt. I'm a lawyer from San Diego. Just started a law firm called Plant and Planet. I'm a botanist, a plant geneticist, and I protect plant variety. I'm working with cannabis.
Welcome to the show.
Awesome.
Very cool. Do you even do tissue culture?
I'm muted. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. I work with all kinds of plant varieties all over the world, and some of my clients do a lot with tissue culture.
Awesome. And then
An interesting show.
yeah, Beth is also with us from the Open Cannabis Project. You're the. I'll let you introduce yourself. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Oh, that's cool. I'm sure that you would say things that were at least mostly right. So my name is Beth Schechter. I'm the executive director of the Open Cannabis Project. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and I'm streaming live from my partner's office / electronic experimental den. So that's what we're up to today. But the Open Cannabis Project is a nonprofit who our mission has really been about creating documentation about cannabis plants, and primarily through genetic records and chemical records of cannabis plants. The idea being that the more information that we can document about these plants, the harder it is for people to do things like patent a plant that might be in the public domain or something similar. Through this work and through a lot of discussions with the community and things, we are really shifting right now into focusing on really creating better data sharing and legal frameworks for breeders and growers. And so that is really the focus of 2019. We're still going to be collecting and sharing data, but the idea is that there are a lot of nuances with regards to how we share this data, with who we share this data, what kind of licensing and contracts that we use. Also, open source, just as a concept, is something that has a lot of different variations. And so, like, when one person says open source, they might mean one thing, and then somebody else might say open source and mean another. So part of what we're doing is really aiming to bring people together this year to talk about these issues, and then to figure out some legal and data sharing frameworks that are really suited to the needs and interests of the cannabis breeder and grower communities.
That's awesome, and I look forward to hearing all about that from you here in a couple of minutes. We also have Josh from Dutch Blooms.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
How you doing, Josh?
What's going on?
We got Fish Ganja Guy.
Hey everybody, hope everybody's doing well.
We got
welcome back, brother.
We got
I love your 50.
We got Hogmaster.
How's everybody doing?
It's Good. It's nice to
Yeah,
see you
man.
again. We got Malik Spider. I think it's been almost 100 episodes since you were on last, so it's been pretty cool to have you back on.
Oh man, I heard Beth and Dave were gonna be on, and then I seen Fish too as a double bonus. You know, how can I not join? This is just amazing. Plus, Ponics, Steve, what you do for the community and everywhere you're going, and your follow through. You know, your follow through is amazing, and mad props to you.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
man.
Aw.
Appreciate it.
What Malik said.
Mr. Green Jeans.
Oh yeah, thanks. Thanks. Great to be here. Yeah, man, I want to double down on that, Steve. What you do for the community, man, you are the man.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
And we got Roger from I Love Growing Marijuana. Or I Love Marijuana.
Hey, how
So.
y'all doing? And yeah, we always give Steve kudos, and he deserves it. That's right. And to have the and I got to give kudos to all you guests that are starting to come on that are so important to helping Steve spread this education, and allowing us to, coming on here and bearing your soul and let us question you about things, and put you on the spot. And it's a lot of fun, and that's why we're all here to spread it and to share it and make sure everybody gets it in the end.
Awesome. So, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the Open Cannabis Project and all the awesome work that you guys do.
Sure. So the Open Cannabis Project, we started, the project itself started in 2015. It's just like a little project at Phyllis Bioscience. And in 2017, I took it on and made it into its own separate organization. And really, 2018 has been our first year as a nonprofit. And that year, we really focused on, what we really wanted to focus on was building a database and a data sharing platform that would more easily let people share data with us. As a way, again, to let people sort of like document their cannabis and share their information publicly. So in that, one of the things that we learned and realized was that, while documenting genetic information is really important, and Dale will probably have some things to say about this as well, when you actually, when you're looking at what Open Cannabis Project is really trying to do is to create documentation of prior art. And what that means is documentation that an invention, in this case a plant, which according to the Patent Office and others is its own type of invention if it's cultivated by the hand of man, or by the hand of a human, but by the hand of man is the legal phrase that's used. I wonder if that will one day include robot hands, but that's a whole different tangent. But the idea being that the more that we can document about these existing plants, the harder it will be for them to get patents on them. So, but part of the way that so basically there's a path that a patent takes when it's going to the patent office. It starts with an application. The application goes to a patent examiner, who is then sort of like looking at all the claims and figuring out whether or not there is or is not something that matches in the public domain or in another patent application. And then it goes through a series of revisions and rejections and revisions, and then it gets to be approved. And so if through robust prior art documentation, you can basically insert like a little wedge into the patenting process that says, nope, oh, hey, you wanted to patent that thing, you can't do it because there's something similar, not allowed. And for cannabis, because everything's been underground for so long, we haven't had a lot of that documentation. So that's really the hard bit of what we're doing. So we started, the project really started with genetic data. And when I came on board, one of the things that we talked about and recognized was that, well, a lot of the patents that seem to be coming through the patent office about plants really are focusing more on chemical information. So like, the terpene profiles or the cannabinoid profiles of a given plant, and really looking for things that seem to be extreme. And Dale, I'm definitely gonna let you follow up on this because I'm sure you have some nuanced things to say, which is why you're here, hooray. So last year we really focused on building, the chemical part of the database. We worked with Confident Cannabis to come up with a protocol that lets any chemical lab to share their data with us. Customers, of course, have to opt in. Like, we operate under the assumption that all of your data belongs to you. And so we're not interested in taking data from anybody, right? Yeah, we're not interested in taking any data from anybody without your permission. So we focus on chemical data. We got some protocols for sharing data with us. And then, through, I'm really grateful to really Steve and to Joshua, both of you, for really engaging me on this discussion, because I think that one of the questions, through doing this work and through building this database, some of the things that we've come to are questions around like, well, wait a second, is fully open source data always really what's best for the cannabis breeders and growers? Like, it's really great for scientists, it's great for research, it's great for public health, but what's really in it for growers to share their data and share their information publicly and freely? Is that necessarily the best way to do stuff? And then number two, again, there's all of these different ideas about what open source is. There's lots of different types of open source. There's also major philosophical questions at the heart of, like, is open source really what cannabis breeders and growers always want? Like, it's like that seems to fit really well with the culture, but if the idea is that, like, well, I want to share with my friends, but I don't necessarily want to share my data or my genetics with everybody, then, well, we need to think about this in a more nuanced kind of community-driven terms. So really what we're focusing on this year is we're calling 2019 our year of big questions, because we're asking a bunch of really big questions. Number one is around data and IP, like what really is the best data sharing and intellectual property / licensing framework that works well for independent breeders and growers. Question number two is about overbroad patents, which has been a big part of our mission. Like, which cannabis related patents are truly overbroad, aka take something out of the public domain that should be in it, or are just so broad that it like stops innovation for anybody except for people within that company or within the organization that holds the patent. And then based on that, what data can we collect and share to help sort of like support or not support the overbroadness of that patent. And then question number three is really about genetic preservation and what are the best methods that we can use to preserve genetics, because documenting cannabis, providing some kind of like digital record of genetic and chemical information is one thing, but that's not actually preserving the genetics. Like, it might encourage people to preserve the genetics, but it's not really preserving the genetics. And so that's something that's really important to everybody on our board. And so our aim for 2019 is to ask these questions, have open dialogues just like this one, and really invite the community to participate in helping to figure out what these systems look like, and ultimately like leading this process, which really is about protecting your work first and foremost. So Dale, go ahead, sorry, ask a question, but then I want to let Dale jump in too.
No, go ahead, Dale.
I think what I would add to that is that for everyday people in the cannabis community, you might think of patents as one thing, and I would think of them as really two very different things. There are patents that plant breeders get, and they protect a new strain or what people might call a new cultivar. If you do some plant breeding and you make something special, and you just want to protect that special strain, that is a plant patent, and that will make it so that no one can run off with that and make copies of it, make clones, and rip you off. And a plant patent it's impossible for a plant patent to be overbroad, because that just protects people, that protects you against having people make unauthorized copies of that one thing. And I don't think anybody has a problem with that kind of patent. If they do, I don't want to be insulting or condescending, but I would want to sit down with them and explain what a plant patent really is, because I think there's some misconceptions around that. But there's a totally different kind of patent, which is called a utility patent. A utility patent can be super broad, and those are very, very much subject to abuse. Not all utility patents are bad. Some of them are perfectly good, and some of them are used appropriately. But if there's a bad patent out there, I guarantee you it's a utility patent. The utility patents that are the patents that are abused in the cannabis industry or the pharmaceutical industry or the biotech industry or the space industry or any industry are 100% utility patents. It's not possible to abuse a plant patent because it's narrow and it's specific to a new cultivar that somebody made by breeding or by selection or by finding a sport growing or a mutant growing in a cultivated state. And it's, like I said, it's narrow. It's like a copyright on a new cultivar. And all it does is protect against someone making unauthorized copies. So one of the first things I would want to do if someone felt like they were just anti-patents, completely against all patents in the cannabis industry, is I would want to sit down with them and help them understand that distinction. And then once we got to that point, if they're anti-patents and they're focused on being anti-utility patents, we might not have a quarrel. Although there's still room. I mean, I have some clients that I think are completely ethical and doing good things that are out inventing completely new technologies in the cannabis space that are getting utility patents. And I only represent, I'd like to think, I fully intend to only represent ethical parties. And what they patent, what they get protection on when they are patenting things as utility patents is exactly and only what they actually invented, what they contributed to the way the Constitution refers to it as, what is it, science and the useful arts or something like that. And it's, so in other words, they're not taking anything out of the public domain that's already there. They invented something, they got a new idea, it's useful, and they want to protect the fruits of their labors for a limited time, and they do that by means of a utility patent. And the protection they get is a reasonable scope that protects what they did, and it doesn't overreach into other people's territory or in some unreasonable way that is abusive. Now, there are people and there are companies that reach so far with their utility patents that it either reaches into the public domain or reaches way into areas that go way beyond what they invented, and that is very abusable. And there's plenty of room for people to be opposed to utility patents and opposed to patent abuse. And I'll tell you, even the courts are opposed to patent abuse. And when they find it, they come down on it. And so when someone sues you for patent infringement, one of your defenses is that the patent is invalid because it covers the public domain. And another one of your defenses is that the patent is being abused for one reason or another. And so I don't want to sit here and say that all patents are good because they're not. But the patent system does have some safeguards against patent abuse. And I'd love to help people understand what those safeguards are. It's far from perfect. There is no perfect system, whether it's, whatever the system is, no perfect system. But that's maybe this is a good time for questions or discussion.
Yeah, so I was just going to open with, so I even myself have been pretty anti, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
For whatever reason, the mic, whatever reason, the camera's not switching over. There we go. So even myself have been anti-cannabis or anti-patents in the past, but until I got a better understanding of how it actually would work and protect, even smaller producers. So for a lot of people out there are anti-patents in general for cultivars. Would you like to explain to someone like that why it would actually help them, especially if they're a small producer, maybe in Humboldt or some of these other places, and explain to them actually how that could help them and help protect their hard work that they've been developing for 20, 30, 40 years without necessarily being a greedy trying to, take over everything. Can you explain to them how that would help them? Because that was something that, until I heard it from you and your seminar, I really I totally to be honest with you, kind of the wrong idea of how that worked. But once it was explained to me, it went, oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And yeah, that it does actually help the little guys and keep their hard work away from some of the, what we would consider corporate cannabis. You guys want to talk about that, either one of you?
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I'll give you an example of a really cool plant breeder I met last year in Oakland. He's a good guy. He kind of didn't want to spend the money on patents, and he had some strains that he thought, well, these are pretty good, but they're not all that. I don't really want to spend a ton of money on a patent attorney, and he thought it would cost a lot of money to get plant patents on his strains. He had some handshake agreements with some people. So he had some strains, he made some clones, he put them out there. These guys said, okay, yeah, we'll sell you clones. They said, we'll pay you X number of dollars or whatever per clone. And then pretty soon the money stopped coming in, but he saw these clones in a catalog, and he's like, hey, what's the deal? That's my genetics out there. And we have a deal. And the guy said, yeah, but money's tight, times get tough, you know how it is. What can I do? And he said, well, we had a deal. And he said, yeah, but, sorry. And this guy had zero recourse. That was his work. That's out there. They didn't even have a contract. Maybe, they had a handshake agreement, and a lot of handshake agreements are actually enforceable contracts. But try taking that to court. If he had a plant patent that he could have gotten for a few $1,000s, he could sue the guy. Now, you don't want to sue anybody, but the fact is, if he'd had a plant patent, the guy never would have pulled that. So it's a matter of getting some respect for the work you do. I learned plant patents working with grape breeders. Central Valley, these guys, when they breed grapes, and I haven't worked with cannabis breeders that long. It hasn't been legal enough to do that for that long. But when I was working with grape breeders 20 years ago, they would do crosses. They would literally plant 10,000 seeds, and then they plant 10,000 seeds, and then they're looking for something to ripen a week earlier than all the others. They kill all but 100 of those plants. And anyway, the bottom line is it takes them 10 years to get something they can put in stores, but they can plant 1,000 acres and put it in stores. You can bet that they're going to get a patent on that, because all it takes is somebody to take one cutting, and they can go plant that all around the world. And if they don't have protection on it, what are they going to do? Now let's extend that to a legal cannabis industry. You might think you're a small guy. You might think, hey, I'm just doing this because I love it. But yeah, you love it, and then it's valuable. Is your work valuable? Is your time valuable? You're doing it because it's valuable, and you're working with people you trust. But everybody's under pressure. Everybody's trying to pay a bill. And next thing you know, the guy that you trust, maybe you trust him, but then somebody else can take a cutting. And that's the problem with plants. And that's the reason that Congress came up with the plant patent statute. Because it is so easy. You only have to have one cutting. And you take one cutting, and you make some clones, and you make clones of the clones, and maybe the person you gave the clone to you trust. But then what happens to the next person that you don't know, that you never met? And before long, that's out there, and you don't have any recourse. But if you have the plant patent, it doesn't matter who gave it to who. When you find that patent is out there and it's unauthorized, you can stop them. And so it is very much like a copyright, that whoever's making illegal copies, you have some recourse and you can stop them. And if your time is worth it, if your effort is worth it, it's really the only way that you have any recourse to do something about illegal copies.
Well, wait a second. Is it the only recourse, or is it also possible to consider something like licensing? You know, because one of the questions that I have, and something that we've talked about internally a lot, is that actually, Dale, will you mute yourself really quick because we're getting some pretty gnarly feedback. Sorry. But you know, one of the questions that we've gotten a lot is, or some of the things that we've discussed internally are, one, you know, just because you spend money on getting a plant patent doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get a return on your investment. So that's A, and I think it's an important thing for folks to consider when they're thinking about intellectual property protection. Two, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that, you know, and really part of where my interest is I'm really interested in protection for older genetics and protection for like heirloom genetics and like finding ways to really create value there. And I find it really interesting because, you know, the intellectual property system as we see it currently, or as it works currently, really benefits the new and the novel. And so there are all of these questions about like, well, okay, cool, we can figure out these protections for new kinds of plants, you know, but what do we do for the older plants? And so, you know, number three, that kind of leads me to, so, you know, we have this, you know, from where I sit, like, it seems like there's this, like, really awesome open source culture in, you know, within the cannabis community. And I think that, you know, what I want to see and what I'm really hoping that the work that we can do this year helps to do is to create really solid open source frameworks that work with the community and that also have really solid legal protection. Now, that said, I think that what's important is that we do not, like, just make a blanket statement and say that patents are bad, that, like, you know, figuring out intellectual property protection is bad. But I also think it's important to like think about this in a really kind of like nuanced way, specifically with regards to, you know, when is it really valuable to get something like a plant patent? Like, you know, and actually, Dale, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, if you know, because most, I would argue, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of cannabis that's out there, especially like, you know, that's on the market. And it's kind of not really that distinct from like a chemical level. Like there's a lot, because there's been so much variation, and I almost see it as like there's like this big pool or matrix of like chemical compounds that are sort of out there on the market. So, you know, which is part of why we're trying to document all of this stuff so that we can figure out, okay, what is in the public domain, and then necessarily like what's the border between the public domain and plants that are actually novel and unique enough to warrant something like a patent. So I don't know, those are just like some thoughts to throw in there. And I should apologize, I have a little bit of a sore throat and I'm a little bit stuffy, so I might be a little bit rambling.
Oh, you sound great.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love that concept you got too. I mean, yeah, I feel a lot about what you feel. I'd like to know the answers to some of those questions myself. I like that. That was very good.
I mean, when people make it, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, go ahead. I'm done.
When people make the F1, you know, a lot of them automatically think, oh, this is the new hype strain. And, you know, sometimes it might be if it's the perfect combination, but you're right, there is such a broad amount of strains, especially with the older strains and everybody having cuts of some of these older strains. Who knows? Like, it's a really interesting subject. And I'm really interested in the tissue culture most of all, because, Dale, how you talk about somebody taking a clone and then that guy taking a clone from a clone. I mean, really, is all they need, what, is a shoe tip, one node, you know, and that's it.
I was just gonna say, and this is something I often use when I hear people that say they're super eager to patent their stuff is, okay, well, the typical like standardization for patenting a cultivar and other plants is an F7. And how many cannabis strains are actually out to an F7? You know, so is cannabis going to get a different set of rules than a normal agricultural product, or because of its medical compounds, or will it be treated the same way? You know, given that it's just a plant.
I think we should maintain that standard if we can, but you're right. If we don't have as many, well, there's so many, you know, because I think Mr. Green Jeans could actually chime in on here on this because of that too, because he likes to take and do new things with genetics You know, I mean, not okay. I don't mean to label him in one box because
I'm
he
the
does
old
it
guy.
all. But you like to take chances with stuff instead of overstabilizing strains. Where we're talking about F7, you're talking about like stabilized and
I'm
all
one of
that.
the few, excuse me, Roger. I'm one of the few people who has taken a strain past F7. I've
Well,
done 3 now.
no, I believe that, but I'm saying you also like to, like you say, you like the freedom of not having it so stabilized, right? In that trade.
Yeah, well, I've just been breeding, 5, 6 generations a year since for 40 plus years or whatever. I've just been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
So I have a number of strains under my belt, all kinds of crosses, all kinds of things. A lot of experience with that. But yeah, I mean, I would say that to really call something a strain, it surely should be inbred exclusively at least 6 or 7 generations, I'd say. I mean, and even that with cannabis doesn't necessarily stabilize in the sense of the way we use the word stabilize. And you might not want it to be that way. Like cherry bomb is probably, is quite variable still, even though I probably inbred that about 12 or 13 generations before I sent it out. So
Can I
there's
ask
a
a
lot of
question?
variability left still in it. Sorry, what did you say, Dutch?
I was going to ask a question. I think it's your scenario is a pertinent way for me to ask the question. So, say he goes out, Mr. Pickens goes out and gets a patent on his cherry bomb, and he finds out that someone else has been working with it, and he wants to take action on that. With most legal things, this is sort of a statement question, but I want some clarification. Is if you're poor, how do you back that shit up, right? Because usually, like, to back anything up legally, even my easement here, I have to have money to pay a lawyer to go deal with this shit. Are there any other protections in this sector for those less economically successful?
I'm going to let Dale answer that question because I think that he has some thoughts. But I have some ideas, but I'm going to let the lawyer talk first. Go, lawyer.
Good point.
Well, good question, because I think this all assumes that that the strains that you're going to patent or the strains that you're going to protect have enough value that the infringements are going to hurt enough that you're going to want to sue that is going to basically merit taking somebody to court. But taking somebody to court is very expensive. Now, with a plant patent, the infringement should be so clear that you never have to take them all the way to trial. And so you'd probably be able to get in and out of that process relatively quickly and inexpensively. But even there, when you're talking about federal court, relatively quick and inexpensive is still not quick and inexpensive. So, yeah, I mean, I think when you ask a question like that, you're really making a good point that if you're not talking about a strain that is going to be worth, $100,000, then you probably don't want to do it.
Well, the reality is most of us are holding strains that definitely are worth the value, but none of us have the money to back it up, and just in cannabis culture in general,
Yeah. I would like to circle back to something that Beth said, just to close the loop on it. I think licensing absolutely has a place. One of the challenges of licensing is that licensing only works between the parties that sign the license or the parties that participate in the license. And when something escapes beyond the people that participate in the license, it's hard to bring in the parties that don't have what is called privity of contract, people that aren't participating in the license, unless you can get them for something like possession of property that doesn't belong to them. And that is, again, if we're talking about a strain that has high value, that would be worth patenting, then anybody who's in possession of that strain could be accused of infringement. But yeah, I mean, there are different kind of degrees of scale here. If you've got a strain that means a lot to you, and that you are going to be doing some commercial things with in a scale that might generate some value, but probably won't generate 6 figures of value, then yeah, I wouldn't patent it. I wouldn't patent it. What I would do is just work with people you genuinely trust. And if you trust them, but maybe not completely, then do some written agreements. And that's where that would be what you'd call licensing. And then, yeah, just spend maybe your own time doing written agreements, and that's a lot less expensive and enforceable enough.
Yeah, and that kind of, I'm sorry, I'm not going to ask you to mute yourself again. Sorry. I would mute you if I could, but I also like what you have to say. But that really echoes something. So at the first Science of Organic Regenerative Cannabis Cultivation Conference in Vancouver, Kevin Jodrey made a statement.
You were so hired for being able to say that.
Hey, well, I've been practicing. I love that conference. And so I'm like, I got to get this right. I can also just call it SORC if you want, you know, so.
Yeah, kudos.
I take that.
Yeah, totally. But, you know, he made a really good point, and, you know, it's something that really stuck with me because it applies to both information as well as genetics. And information is kind of my nerdy world of choice. But once you let your genetics out into the world, you kind of can't really control where they go. And so really, I think that this is a really important concept for us to talk about here, which is that, you know, having a license in and of itself is not enough to protect you, right? It is like one important step. It is a legal document. It is a contract. It is something for you to fall back on. But like, you know, you wouldn't give some seeds with an open source license to Monsanto, right? You know, like you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't give it to somebody that you just like, whatever. I know that they're just going to go and put that into some, if you don't want them to put it into a proprietary strain, but you know that that's what they're going to do, like, don't give it to them, you know? And so I think that there's part of this, like, process where we talk about this that really is about like, okay, what are the like specific legal strategies that we can do or that we can use? And then also like, how can we be smart about this? You know what I mean? And I feel like the good news is that, I mean, y'all have been working together for a long time and you've got some pretty good spidey senses when it comes to, you know, who to trust and who not to trust. So, you know, you got that pretty well honed. So that's a good thing. But, you know, the other thing is like, you know, when we, you know, kind of like coming back to Open Cannabis Project and like data stuff, like this is where, you know, we really want to think carefully about open source and like what kind of sort of like what level of open source we want to work with our data and genetic data as well as chemical data. Because, you know, once information is out in the world, you also really can't control where it goes. You know what I mean? Like everyone's done the thing where they've like said something to their friend and then their friend told another friend and their friend told another friend. And now suddenly someone who's like 5 degrees of separation has some piece of information that's sort of different than what you said, but they have it. It's weird, whatever. Yeah, so genetics and information to me work really similarly, which then speaks to just being really careful and really thoughtful about how you share that genetics or how you share that information and with whom you share that information as well. And then, you know, that kind of feeds into like getting more philosophical. I think that like one of the sort of like dualities on the table with a lot of this stuff is, you know, on the one hand, like protective mama bear Beth is like, I want to help all the cannabis farmers protect your work, right? You know, but then also like free thinking open source Beth is like, well, but we want for all this information and we want to be able to share information. We don't want to start siloing information. When we silo information and we silo genetics, like that's actually not good for genetic preservation. That's not really good for innovation. So like, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear from the group, including Dale, but also the folks who are on the call, like, you know, what do you think is kind of a good balance between like protecting yourself and your work and then also like sharing information and sharing genetics on a wider scale?
I like what Dale was saying. I don't know that this kind of rang true. Like to put a dollar value on a realistic dollar value on what you're holding, you know, and it's going to have. If you think you can extract that money out of it, you know, you have a business plan to extract that money out of it, then it's probably worth taking some, you know, initiative and putting some money aside and being ready, you know, making the patent and having some money set aside to enforce it if necessary. There's a lot going on in there, extracting the currency out of a strain, you know.
I think a big part of it too is that, you know, from a point of view of the consumer, the person buying the seed, you know, if it's not, you know, stable enough, you know, yes, you're going to have to phenome hunt. It's part of cannabis, but you shouldn't have, you know, you should get a lot of decent ones out of that. You know, it should be stable enough, you know, again, to an F5 and F7, you know, some kind of actual work, not just, hey, you bought two things online, crossed them, and that happened to not be patented, and now you got a strain. You know, you should have to actually put some effort in. And you know, if you look at some of the work that Mr. Green Jeans has done, or some of the work that, you know, all the other breeders, you know, that Josh has done, and some of these other people that have done, and Malik Spider, and everybody else that has put a lot of work into breeding these strains and developing their own strains. And I know I've done a lot of work with aquaponic CBD strains specifically, and I don't talk about it much on the show, but there's some really cool stuff that I have that I've shared a couple of beans with Mr. Green Jeans and a couple of other people that I've been working for quite a long time. You know, so that's why, you know, there needs to be a minimum level of work in order to actually claim that. I remember back when, do you guys remember the guy from Big Buddha Seeds or whatever, tried to patent the cheese strain, even though he did not develop it.
I remember.
That was completely ridiculous, you know, and they had no right to it. And that's also, you know, that was one of the reasons that got me so violent against patents, until they actually understood how it could actually help someone that's a small breeder and not just be a way for corporate cannabis to come in and push us out. It actually gives us a weapon, you know, in our quiver that we can use to fight back and protect our genetics and keep them from look at what happened with Charlotte's Web. You know, Kevin Jodrey just talked about that last week, about how they got a couple of cuts from Wade Laughter and did a little, you know, crossbred it with one other one, and oh, we have a new fucking perfect strain. Well, actually, you didn't do anything. You know, they did very minimal amount of work for that. Then they built a whole lobby group that tried to push out anyone else except for them in other states. And I'm just saying, you know, using it as an example of what could happen if you don't have protections, and you can get totally bent over, like what happened with the case of Charlotte's Web.
Oh wow. Yeah, when Mr. Green Jeans talks about the F7, that's amazing. And somebody like me that's a new breeder, I've always been like kind of open source, just giving my genetics out, take a clone, you know, that way I know I can get it back later if I was ever to lose it. Breeding seeds, giving them free, you know, just to build my brand. And, you know, 'cause I'm starting out, and like you said, you have to have that spot where you finally decide where it's worth it. And like Dale said, where you have enough money to back your, he didn't exactly say money, but where you can afford to go to lawyers and patent your strains. And
you can do
when
both.
you got that something special, like that CBD you're talking about, Steve, oh my gosh, that sounds really special.
And see, that's something I wanted to say as far as Mr. Green Jeans, because he bugged out. I'm not sure if he lost what, or is he back? He back there? He's back. I think he's back. All right. So I didn't mean to say that he didn't have F7s or whatever. I meant to say that he likes to do like you do, where he takes a couple of he picks out a killer male and a killer female, from my understanding, and then he breeds seeds and then he just gives them to people, you know, and so that's really cool. But, you know, there's no doubt over 30 or 40 years that he's got stable strains. And in fact, what I was getting at is the fact that Dale brought up, or you know, was brought up about, no, actually, Josh brought up the question about what would be yours. And it's funny because Mr. Green Jeans gave Cherry Bomb to everybody,
Swami.
and then one guy took it on and
Swami.
he ran out of it, and he's allowed it to be credited to that guy. So, I mean,
Swami.
in a way, that
That's just commercial. There's a lot of other people, smaller private groups and stuff that have saved cherry bomb too. I got friends in England and that I'm in communication with on ICMAC. Oh yeah, people got it all over, but it was just that Swami was commercially distributing it. So yeah.
And your buddy.
And I'd had some trouble with some other people before that, like Reefer Man, and I probably shouldn't be talking about. I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that bad shit, but yeah. But yeah, I guess I'm the guy that started trying to do the open source cannabis thing, trying to give away, because after a while you have so many responsibilities as a breeder. You're going to collect a lot of different seed lines. You're going to have a lot of things, and cherry bomb was obviously very valuable, and I'd spent many years in breeding it, so there's a lot of work involved, and I know that one of the really useful things about a true breeding strain is having males that don't necessarily need to be chosen. We were asking about, people always ask about how do you select a male. Well, one of the best ways to select a male is from a true breeding and inbred line. Because he's, sort of he's like representing his strain and stuff. Anyway, don't want to go into that, but that's one of the values of an inbred, of having inbred lines. But outcrossing is great too. I mean, at this point, I guess I feel like as a breeder that you can kind of just stay ahead of the game. You can kind of just keep on doing art. You know what I mean? As I can keep on. I could breed 3 or 4 or 5 generations a year indoors, under lights, and I can come up with something next year that's pretty damn bitchin', just combined with things that you give me this year, So I patented, but I could just kind of keep moving faster than I can move really quick too,
Dude, and that's so legit. Like, that is so legit. I've heard that from so many people too, that it's like, okay, that's fine. That, like,
as an artist,
as one, right, you're an artist. Like, you're the only one who knows what you're doing. And also, like, when you go and create some beautiful thing, and then you've shared, information about what that beautiful strain is with the world, it's going to take people, like, time to actually catch up with you, right? And so, like
some people, I show them a pedigree, and they go, "Oh, well, you're just giving me all the secrets. I could just do the same thing." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Okay, just try it."
Yeah. You know how long it took to phenome hunt the right
That's
males
why
and
I'm
females?
giving you that pedigree.
Yeah.
So I'm an
artist. You need 1,000 plants to figure out the one you want.
And that's
I can show you how to mix the paints. I can show you how to mix the paints, and I can show you how to put them on the canvas. But you're not going to make a painting like me.
Yeah.
What I mean?
That's exactly right.
That is exactly right. And that's my whole, that's, I think, one of my things that I've kind of again, this is like a little bit of like my mama bear horse. And by the way, I don't have children. So I'm like, okay, great. This project is my child, or whatever. But like, y'all's value and your knowledge is so high. And I think that what we've seen a lot with this first wave of the green rush, in many cases, and not all cases, but in many cases, is people getting sold short, is people giving away their knowledge, and then being like, I've heard so many stories of people being like, oh yeah, such and such company wanted to consult with me, never paid me a dime. I gave them all this information because there was this like carrot dangled in front of me, some money in the future, and then you're written out of it. And so this is where I'm like, okay, like, y'all's knowledge is invaluable, and you should be compensated for that knowledge. You should have if you are going to go the commercial route, then I feel like you should be able to have some kind of like long-term payout. And then like, if somebody is basically using your work and your knowledge to make a long-term investment for themselves, then I would like, in my world, ideally, I would like for you to also be a beneficiary of that investment. So, so I'm just agreeing with a lot of things that are being said here.
Pedigree is everything. The pedigree shows the amount of work you put into something. If you've got a nice long pedigree there, it shows, that represents the labor and the lore. The story is what you're buying when you buy genetics, when you pay for seeds. You're paying for the truth, right? That's what the breeder is actually selling, is the truth.
Sounds
Right.
like you and Kwame should go to get with Dale and patent fucking cherry bomb is what it sounds like to me.
I guess. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't.
so
No.
Cherry bomb is so far in the past for me. It's so cool. I'm growing it again. You know, I've got pure cherry bomb plants again in my garden
Yeah.
after 5 years of them being gone. It's amazing, and I'm so glad you know, it was such a great decision to push it out into the public domain. And I know that a lot of people, you know, have a lot of other breeders have been able to use it well, because a true breeding strain really is good for crosses. You know, that's what it's really good for. You know, especially. So, you know, I think I feel really good about that. It's fantastic, man. I've gotten so much good vibes back from the community for just doing that alone. You know what I mean? So I really recommend everybody else do that. You guys all work towards that. All you younger breeders do the same thing. You know, 7 generations isn't that long indoors. You should be able to pull the seeds out of and push through at least 3 or 4 generations a year. It isn't really that bad, you know. Get your containers down. Call me, send me an email. We'll talk. I'll explain the whole thing to you. It's not that hard.
That's awesome. I love the way that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask Dale, like, what's approximate cost for like a plant patent? You know?
Yeah. Typically, you can get one filed for between $5,000 and $7,500, and then it usually doesn't cost very much to get it allowed. So you should be able to get through the whole process for between $7,500 and $10,000, and it can be less. It depends on how prepared you are to give all the information to your attorney, and then it also depends on whether the patent examiner bounces it back at you. It's not uncommon for the patent examiner to reject it once, because they like to see more description, but they usually don't reject it twice. So I think if you set aside $10,000, you should be able to get in and out for that, and that's usually a pretty good ballpark.
Now in licensing, is that can you talk about that? Like, is it sufficient enough? Like, if I write a contract, you know, I'm going to let you use this clone, but I'm not going to let you, you know, reproduce it, sell the clone. You can only use it to flower in your garden. We just write that contract up. Is that a licensing agreement, or is this a licensing agreement that need to be filed with somebody?
Well, you're asking about about the cost of a licensing agreement, or how do you set it up, or what's the question?
Both. I guess both. How do you set it up, and is there a cost associated with it, or is that something that like someone like myself who's not a lawyer could just write an agreement?
Yeah. The main thing you want to do with the licensing agreement is really understand who the parties are and what you're trying to accomplish. Every one of them can be different. A lot of it depends on the scope, the geography of what you're doing. A lot of it depends on there's so much involved. Every contract can be different, but I think that the best place to start almost with any contract is for the parties to just really identify what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and come up with some deal points. Really just a simple list of what it is they agree on, or they think they agree on, or what it is they're trying to accomplish. And I would recommend you never start just by writing an agreement. That can be super cumbersome and really inefficient. But if you can make a list of even just a handful of things that you agree on, or that you think you agree on, and negotiate those first, and then get into another wave of more details, and then go from there. Then once you've worked out the details, then you give it to your lawyer and have them write it up. I've done agreements that were as simple as a couple pages, and and not very expensive. And I've done agreements that were over 100 pages and took a couple of years to negotiate because they were, you know, multinational and super complicated and super high stakes. And I'd be embarrassed to tell you how much they cost. So it's extremely variable.
So one of the questions that I have, like, kind of with, like, well, two things. One is, you know, to that end, one of the things that Open Cannabis Project is hoping to work on this year is to work with, we're putting together a breeder advisory panel and a legal advisory panel. And the idea, or not panel, but boards. And the idea is for those groups of people to work together to create 3 to 4 standard licenses that really work for a few different, like, primary use cases for breeders and growers, so that you can have a place to start with all that stuff. You know, and of course, with any license and any sort of like legal contract, it's, you know, as Dale and the other lawyers have gotten me to remind people, it's always important to check with a lawyer who's licensed to work within your jurisdiction so that you can make sure that you're not overlooking some weird local clause or something that might sort of like interfere with the contract. But yeah, we're really looking forward to doing that, because I think that will be a really helpful tool for a lot of people, so that, you know, because there's always going to be some situation that's a little bit different, but at least to have a place to start is going to be great. So the idea is, you know, draft 3 to 4 contracts and then actually have them available for public review, and then to like make them available as sort of open source contracts for people that they can, or at least open source contract templates that they can use. And I can imagine that some of them will be for like open breeding kind of related use cases, really similar to Strainly has this really awesome open cannabis license that I like a lot. And, you know, my only qualm with it is that it's based on German law. And because the United States, being the little special snowflake that it is, has not signed the Convention on Biological Diversity, it doesn't really have the same teeth here. But I'm excited to make, I think, a version of that license and then a few others that can be made available to people. And then the other question that I have, I think, for Dale and for the rest of the group is, like, you know, one of the questions I'm really looking to try to answer is, you know, legal fees are expensive. Breeders and growers have gotten hit so hard this past year, like so hard, you know, and like I'm new coming into cannabis. Like I started in the cannabis world like late 2017 or early 2018, like just as everyone was getting their ass kicked. And it has been devastating to witness. And so, you know, one of the other questions that I'm interested in figuring out is like what are some ways that we can work, in addition to like working together and figuring out some standard licensing agreements, like what are other sort of methods and organizational systems and ways that we could think about pooling resources so that we're not every single breeder has, I mean, I love you, Dale, and I want for people to pay lots of money, you know, but like, you know, how can we make it so that like, you know, 10 breeders can still get legal services and afford it, you know what I mean, versus like one person going to a lawyer at a time, or is that just pie in the sky thinking?
You have to start with a co-op, and then you have to, once you get the co-op of the growers, you get the community involved in the co-op, so that that will generate enough income for you to afford a lawyer.
Wow.
Yeah, you have to get a co-op. So like if you want to grow vegetables in an area, the only way to make money against the big corporate giants is you have to get 10 or 12 different farms to be a co-op, and so you go together to make your money, and that way you're able to form a legal fund. I mean, I come from a family where my mother was involved in the law, you know, for her whole career, so. You know, I think about that kind of stuff. You know, yeah, it allows you you have better access as a group than you do by yourself.
The problem is they banned co-ops in a lot of the places that grow weed. So you can't legally, like most of California, you can't do a co-op. Colorado, I'm pretty sure you can't do co-ops. You can't do co-ops in, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, in Washington.
No.
So
you have to have, it's all disclosed ownership and disclosed funds.
Yep.
Even if I want to use the money I made from growing and selling legal cannabis
to
Oh.
upgrade, put some new lights in my facility or whatever, build a new greenhouse, I have to get those funds approved and vetted by the liquid cannabis board.
Well, you have to take care of your own farm with a co-op. It's just that you pull your resources and put in money for the fund, like for a legal fund. It's not about. I'm not sure,
Well, could you?
because it didn't sound like you still have to take care of your own farm,
My
and you have to
question
be able to
is.
produce what you produce.
My question is.
We're still allowed co-ops here.
Could you form a club, a club or other type of organization that you could then, pay fees to and do it that way? If you can't do a co-op, because I know I did a lot of work with the aquarium clubs, both on the East Coast in Philadelphia and in New Jersey, and I know
that's adorable, by the way. Sorry, aquarium club. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also
definitely cool.
My parents are really involved with the Corvette clubs, and I know both of them have very structured stuff. It seems like there's already kind of a template for how to set those up for taxes and everything else. And it seems like maybe that would be an avenue. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to use your cannabis funds without some kind of legal gymnastics or a very good accountant. But
you kind of read my mind. If I can inject real quickly back to what I was saying and then you took me kind of like you read my mind, is that, well, think about all the young generation and the politics going on right now. They just write their own rules. And I would love to hear from Dale after I say what I'm saying, but we just change it. If it's not a co-op, if you can't have a co-op, like Steve said, a club, or figure out a different name or some kind of way that you could create an entity that had several growers or several farms or a whole network of people across the country, like it's going on with this Regenerative Organic Cannabis Conference. Thank you, Josh.
I think Dale's probably the best person
but
to
that
ask.
kind of idea where we just change the name and so that we get around the law. Is that possible, Dale?
Here's an idea. I'm not exactly sure how you organize this, but imagine you're, the next Emerald Cup or something, and okay, you think about how Costco and some of these other places get their crazy prices. They negotiate volume rates, right? So you get together with a bunch of your friends, and you go to some lawyer, and you say, "All right, my friends and I want to negotiate a volume discount with you. We're gonna bring this number of plant patents to you, or we're gonna bring this number of contracts to you, and we're gonna want to get a discount on your rates because we can bring you this much work." I bet you a lot of lawyers would say, "All right, well, let's sit down and talk about that." I can't speak for other lawyers, but I bet a lot of them would. Because suddenly you're a big client instead of a bunch of little clients. I think you'd have some leverage there.
Good. So it is just that. So that's there you go. There we got a like a benchmark to kind of try and start out with. But yeah, I can't believe they actually could. I honestly can't believe you telling me that out west you guys are. Oh, you can't have a co-op. Since that's just like you go together. That was American way.
Welcome to the upside down world of cannabis, where up is down, left is right, and nothing makes any sense, and it's all written in a language you can't read.
Not the American way.
No. This is whatever. I'm like, but this is so American, right? Like, I mean, this is just like going for big business. I mean, this is what we've been doing for generations. I mean, I don't know, how un-American is that really?
I feel that.
On that, so let me ask a crazy conspiracy theory question that I have had for quite a while, and it's something that I don't want to give the government any ideas, but this is something I've been harping on for a couple of years, and I want to hear an honest answer from two people that could actually give me the right answer on this, because I don't think we've ever had anyone on the show. So my fear is that the government basically requires home growers to switch to autoflower so they can control production, and basically only allow autoflower seeds for home, for sale publicly, at least for home production. This way they can make their tax money on each one. They know how many plants you have, and to do some kind of regulation like that. So that's my crazy conspiracy theory on why I don't like autos. Is that
But
something
wouldn't
you
they
guys
be able
could
to just
see?
breed the autoflower traits out of it? You know, maybe
In
incorporate it
theory,
into other strains and
in
eventually
theory, but it's
work
something
around that as well.
it's a fear that I have, and it's one I would love to hear.
Well, I think there's too many people out there. I'm going to chime in before anybody answers. There's too many people out there with seeds.
Oh,
For
I
the
don't doubt
government to
that.
tell us we got to grow our flowers.
I'm
with
just
Malik, and I'm, and Dougie and all the people out there that breeders. There's a million, billions and billions and trillions and zillions of freaking seeds. They cannot stop us from growing photo period cannabis.
I'm
Well,
just
and I
saying.
think actually I would say that, and I don't know enough about, it's taken me a long time just to kind of wrap my head around how the law and everything works in the United States. My understanding is that there's just so much. My understanding is that in some places in Europe, you're actually only allowed to grow seeds that come from certain catalogs. And Dale, I don't know if you know more about this. I remember having a conversation again with Alan from Strainly about this a while ago, and I don't know specifically how it works. But I actually, in the United States, even though like we've definitely got some stuff that's really messed up, like I kind of don't see, given the pathways that we have to get access to seeds currently, I don't see something like that happening here. I could see something like that happening elsewhere based on these other sort of like seed regulation laws. But I definitely want to hand over to Dale to speak to more specifics about that.
I don't know actually anything at all about that. Haven't heard a word about it, and yeah, nothing. I've been in conversations with USDA plant variety protection, and frankly, I don't think they're remotely sophisticated enough to pull anything off like that.
Good.
That makes
Well,
me
that's
feel
great
better.
news.
Yeah, that was the best answer I could have gotten. So you were talking.
Yeah.
Nice people, but yeah, not that.
Sophisticated. I've had
It
dinner.
would seem like an impossible undertaking. That was my point. I mean, how are you going to do that? Really, you couldn't stop them from growing when it was totally, illegal across the board, and with the U.S. government paid other countries to, that end up putting people to death for, drugs.
Right, but Canada has.
Can stop them from growing cannabis.
Canada only allows certified strains right now. Canada only allows certified hemp strains and certified cannabis strains for resale to the public. So it's already happening. Like the thought of that is absolutely like Canada's doing something that's even worse than that, where they're only allowing whitelisted strains. In my opinion, they're not even giving that much wiggle room.
People just don't follow the rules. I looked into the Washington kind of rules, and we do have to grow certified hemp seed.
And who certifies it? I'm really also just getting like my head around hemp too.
Agriculture?
I asked the same question, and they have, I can't remember who it is, but it's international certifying.
Third-party certification company that for $25,000 will certify any strain, right?
The guy from a guy from Exxon too.
Yeah, Jason from Pheno Seed Bank, man, he would know the answer to that question if you have to ask him.
Yeah,
I am so curious about this, and I'm adding this to like definitely rabbit holes to like dive into and figure out some stuff.
I'll send you the whitelists after the show, so you have them. So my question is: earlier you talked about a couple of different tiers for licensing. Do you want to touch on that? What you kind of consider to be the different license types and how that might benefit? Because you talked a little bit about that in one of the talks I heard you give on the why the different ones might make sense, and I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. And so, when we talk about different tiers of licensing, I really want to give a mad shout out and kudos to Jerry Whiting, who has been sort of I don't know if y'all are familiar with him, but he has been sort of a proponent for open source cannabis for a long time. he excuse me, put together something called Cannabis Breeders' Rights a couple of years ago, sort of as like a first step towards a like manifesto about open source cannabis breeding. And he came up with a version 2.0, and the version 2.0 is like this matrix of, you know, the you know, what kind of what you're working with, whether it's a tissue culture or a seed or a clone, with, you know, whether or not you want for that tissue culture or seed or clone to be shared commercially, with the column that's about like whether or not you actually want attribution, aka do you want people to like list you as the author when they breed with that strain, or basically like list out, I guess to a certain degree, like what was bred with what, so that you have some idea about like how a new strain or cultivar was made from these from older works. Something that we've seen from the Creative Commons world, which is a sort of like open source framework for sharing copywritten works like like software, like images, like writing, is that they have like a whole bunch of different licenses. Like there's probably, I think, also like 20. Like, so I think that like Jerry has called out something like 20 different licenses, and Creative Commons has also called out some large amount of licenses. At a certain point, when you have so many licenses, it's really difficult to make a choice as to which one you want. And so there's actually a ton of Creative Commons licenses that go unused just because people are like, I don't know, whatever. Excuse me. Oh, I love this wonderful sore throat thing that's happening.
You're cool.
Thanks. So in terms of different tiers, I mean, as Open Cannabis project, obviously we have to remain committed to open source. And so I can see a few different tiers related to open source breeding. And I can also see a few different tiers that are related to basically like commercial liability and the idea of like getting licensed, like or getting royalties for the use of the strain in the long term. But the answer to that question for me though, and so like that's sort of like high level, sort of like wide watercolor strokes about like what that could look like. But really, I think that the process that we are interested in using is one where like, okay, hey, team of breeders and growers, what are sort of the different use cases that you see? And then based on that, like, how can we develop sort of some standard licenses to match each of these different ones? So I have some general ideas about how that would work, but I think that the specifics of what those different licenses might be will come down to, what this team thinks is really works well for them.
Awesome.
And when I say the team, I'm talking specifically about our breeder advisory panel, which we are slowly but surely putting together.
Is that better?
Well, if you're involved
Is that
with the
better?
conference, you have
Hold on a
really
second.
wide
Hold
people
on.
to choose from.
Hold on, we had a reverb. Is that better, guys? All of a sudden, we were having some audio noise.
I didn't hear it, so that was good.
Okay, cool. I think we fixed it.
We're on a maiden voyage to the new interface tonight, so we're worried about how the quality of the broadcast.
Yeah, sorry about that. We've had some technical issues. For anyone listening to the audio recording version at the end of this, I do apologize. I think we're better now. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to fix that real quick.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think that's really most of what I wanted to say. So, like, then again, I guess I would turn the question back to the group of people here. Like, when you think about, like, okay, I have these plants. I have, some plants I want to keep for myself, or not necessarily keep for myself, but some plants are definitely like, I know that they have high value. I don't necessarily want to open source them. And then maybe I have a ton of plants that I do want to open source. I don't know, like, what are how could you imagine different sorts of tiers to licensing that could work for you, sort of at a high level and spur of the moment kind of way?
Awesome. Sorry, I was trying to make sure.
Selective use, like you could choose the group of individuals that could use the license, right? If you're part of a collective or cooperative, you might want to allow the cooperative to use that tool.
Cool.
We had a request, Beth. I don't know. Somebody said your audio got messed up the last 2 minutes there and wanted to know if you could rewind.
Rewind.
I also
don't
would
know.
love a rewind, just like a quick summary.
Yeah, just a quick summary.
A quick summary rewind. Well, I guess a quick summary. So the question was, what are the different tiers of licensing that you think could be useful? And the answer is like, at a high level, I could see a few different versions of an open source license plus some kind of license that also, maybe is like it's a commercial license, but that really focuses on getting like a long-term investment for royalties or some other sort of like long-term payout for the breeder, as sort of like a little suite of licenses. But I think for us, within this process, I think that the question is really for the breeders and growers, like, what are the, really identifying like, okay, what are the 3 to 4 different, and maybe 5 or whatever, but like, what are these few different use cases that you are interested in having sort of an agreement with, like at a high level? And so based on that, like, I think that that's how we would ultimately determine like what the different tiers of licenses are. The whole process is really about defining with the community like what really works for y'all, and then from there creating licenses that match. So, to that end, I'm really interested in hearing from the folks who are on this call, like, what kind of licensing could work for you. And we just heard from Josh that like, something like selective use. So maybe something that a license that allows for like free and open sharing within a collective or within a select group of people, but then maybe more limited sharing outside of that group might be one type of license that we could think about creating. It's a one type of license, and then also it sounds like maybe some other kind of like legal framework that we could think of creating. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing from y'all. Like,
I heard,
what do you think?
I've heard of what comes to mind is what I've heard before is somebody saying when you sell a clone to somebody else, they got to grow it up to your standards or they can't brand it as your clone, So I think that might be one that could be useful, possibly.
That's useful, and that's also really interesting because so within the world of open source software, which a lot of times when we talk about open source cannabis breeding, a lot of people look at open source software as sort of a parallel, and that makes a lot of sense. Because it is another world that is emergent. It is another world where there's a lot of information that was kind of underground and hidden for a long time, and then the patent office maybe tried to put some patents on some things that they maybe shouldn't have because they didn't have that information. Anyway,
well, you allow people to make it better.
Yeah, exactly. You allow people to make it better.
Like Malik and Mr. Green Jeans, they make a strain, they pick out a mother and a father, and they say, this is the shit right here. They make a lot of seeds and they give them to everybody.
Sure.
And allow everybody to make it better.
Right, exactly. And that is totally
software. Yeah.
That is right, exactly. And that's totally valid, and that's a super awesome way to go about it. And some of the questions that people have about open source software is like, well, if it's open source, like you can't make money on it. Well, that's not entirely true. Like a business plan that can work really well with something that's open source is saying like, hey, so this software is open source, but it's also complicated, and in order for it to be implemented in the proper way, what you need to do is actually hire me or hire my team to come into your facility or come into your grow, and to make sure that we're helping you grow it. So now you actually have a system set up where it's like, okay, cool, I'm giving you my genetics, but that comes with you hiring me in order to be able to help you. And maybe that's not something that we need to do among people who are all within the same kind of collective community. But if you're thinking about a strategy for integrating open source genetics with a more commercial operator or a licensed producer, then that is another way to sort of think about doing it.
Well, that's exactly how commercial greenhouse companies and all do it, like Crop King and everybody else. They sell you the seeds, they say the greenhouse, they come in there, you send a guy down, you pay money, he trains you to how to do everything for a while, and and then they can always send a field rep down to help you if you get in trouble. And so that's what I think that's what you're talking about right there.
So
that's exactly right.
My question I have for you two is, so for chemovars, how is it that they're getting a utility patent on chemovars when the chemovars change radically depending on grow method? You almost have to do in my opinion, a complete vertical of the cultivation included in order to achieve that chemovar or chemotype in that plant. Like for instance, I could take a strain and grow it in no-till soil, and the terpene and cannabinoid expression is going to be radically different than if I grow it in aquaponics with a dual root zone, and it'll be radically different again than if I do it at hydroponics. Or even if I grow it exactly the same method, if I grow it in, say, Washington, where Josh is, and then I grow it in, say, South Carolina, where some of our other people are at, or I grow it in sorry, I didn't want to give anyone away. Or I grow it in Jamaica. It's going to be radically different in how the cannabinoid and terpene expression is going to be just super radically different. So, how is it that they're going to make that claim? Because you could even get a similar chemotype from a different strain with a radically different grow method, or maybe those two strains or cultivars have the same chemotype based on that terroir or whatever. Like they're just going to express the same. Like how is it that they can make a differentiation? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
I thought that was more questions.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah.
You had me at chemotype, bro.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but Dale, this is all you.
Okay. You get to be the expert witness for the defendant when those guys sue somebody for infringing that patent. Because the defendant is going to say, oh, that patent's invalid. There's no way those claims mean anything because they claimed something without, they didn't even understand the damn plant. And then you'll get up there and you'll testify. Basically, you'll say what you just said. You'll say when they claimed this stuff, they didn't even know what the hell they were talking about. And one of the things that a patent application is supposed to do, one of the requirements for a patent application is it is supposed to enable someone of ordinary skill in the art to make and use the invention in a way that is commensurate with how it is claimed, without undue experimentation. And so if they are claiming certain chemical properties, then they have to teach someone how to achieve those chemical properties every time without undue experimentation. And if they didn't teach someone exactly how to cultivate that plant to achieve those chemical properties, then they didn't meet the enablement requirement. Now, I don't have all 300 pages of that patent disclosure or whatever in front of me, but from what I've been told, they didn't do that. And if they didn't, then the defendant calls you as the expert witness and you just say what you said. And if the jury believes you, then there will be a case. I'm not actually rendering a legal opinion. I'm being entertaining.
Yeah.
But that's what this is entertainment and information. And if this is how it works, then the defendant will win.
Yeah, because that's been something that that leads into my next question, because there's another gentleman I've seen online that works a lot with CBGA, and he can synthesize a lot of those. And he was like, well, I can just synthesize anybody's cultivar. Well, do they have a legal right to synthesize anything that someone's worked years to produce? What would the legal protections be for a cultivator against someone, say, using yeast or some of these synthetic methods to replicate a terpene and cannabinoid profile in order to profit off of, this guy invented something that happens to be great for cancer or in theoretic, or XYZ medical application. Then they want to come in and replicate it immediately without doing any of the hard work, just because you made the discovery and announced it, or they found out even through unscrupulous means. What kind of protections would be against someone trying to profit off of other people's hard work in that way?
Well, I'm not sure I understand that question, but I'll just answer the question that you might have asked. So I'm like being a presidential debate here.
You're being a good lawyer. Thanks, Dale.
Okay. When someone claims something that maybe they didn't invent, or maybe they claim something that isn't new, it's up to the examiner to notice that. It's up to the patent examiner to find that out or to challenge them on it. And one of the problems in the cannabis industry is that the way this whole process works during patent examination is the patent examiner has to look at what the person is claiming, and they take what they're claiming and they do a search on it. And they search for what is in the literature. And the literature is made up of other patents, and it's made up of academic publications and commercial, prior commercial activity. And what the problem we have is in cannabis is that most of what happened in cannabis up to a few years ago is hidden. There wasn't an academic literature, and there wasn't very much of a patent literature, and there certainly wasn't a well-published commercial activity. And so the patent examiner is pretty much flying blind. There might have been all kinds of things that were happening, but they didn't get published. So the patent examiner is blindfolded and taking wild guesses about whether what this person is claiming, whether it's really new or not. And so they do their best job of figuring out whether it's new and whether it's patentable, and they issue the claims. They take their best shot at deciding whether it's patentable, and then the person walks out of the patent office with this bright shiny patent, and they're happy and proud about it. But nobody knows. Nobody can know if that patent is valid. Well, actually, maybe some people do, because some people have been, operating in the cannabis industry, and they look at that patent and say, "Oh no, that's not valid because I've been doing that for 30 years." So there might be people who do know that patent isn't valid, but they don't have any publications to prove it. So they're just going to get sued, and when they do get sued, then they bring out their personal evidence, or they gather their friends around them, or they talk to an expert and say, "All right, time to go defend myself in court. Let's gather the troops here and let's poke some holes in that patent." So that's kind of how that will work. And we, as the Open Cannabis Project, and some people who care about this, want to help build some of those tools. And to some extent, we want to help educate the patent office and give them some better tools so they can do this examination. But the tools are very limited. I started a website to try to do some of that. It's called MJ Patents Weekly. It's trying to get people to comment when a new patent comes out. It tries to encourage people to comment on whether they think that patent is valid or not. That hasn't really caught on very much yet. It's mostly just entertainment. Hey, look at this crazy patent. Somebody has a camera that you put on the back of your tooth to see what you're smoking this week or whatever. There's, it's a fun website, but it hasn't really got people up in arms about patents that are getting allowed yet. Maybe someday. But
I think
we
also,
are.
to be fair, I use MJ Patents Weekly. I find it very valuable because, one of the things that, I definitely have some usability things that we can talk about on another call. But like one of the things that I find to be really helpful about that site is, in order, I remember when like I first started like on this trajectory with Open Cannabis Project, people were like, well, what's the landscape of cannabis related patents? And I was just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the cannabis patent landscape is. And what mjpatentsweekly.com has really done is to outline, okay, what is issuing currently, what applications are being published, because there's, I think, a 1.5 year block between when a patent application is submitted and when it's made known publicly. So there's basically like a 1.5 year of patent applications that like no one in the public can see because they're being considered and all that kind of stuff. But what's really helpful about MJ Patents Weekly is that it helps you to see like, okay, and this has been really helpful for me because like Open Cannabis Project at its inception has really been about like preventing overbroad patents on cannabis plants. I am stoked to say that like it does not seem like there are all that many of these patents on the plants. So that's a big yay. What's a little bit more challenging or worth considering is all of the weird patents that are occurring on different cannabis products. Like, there is, Dale just mentioned this patent on a camera that goes on the back of your teeth to see what you're smoking. There's also a tea formulation that's basically like cannabinoids plus green tea plus yerba mate plus peppermint plus stevia. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's actually novel enough to warrant a patent, and I think that that also feeds into some other challenges that we've seen in like the trademark office with regards to, you know, there was just recently a case where somebody trademarked the term fire cider. Fire cider is a traditional recipe, right? The patent office or the USPTO had no business granting a trademark on it, but then somebody actually sent a cease and desist to people who were making fire cider, and they're like, well, wait a minute, this is like this older formulation, like there shouldn't be a trademark on this. And so this is where it's like, okay, there's this like squishy area where there's a lot of work that's been done in like the herbalist and in the plant medicine community that is not being regarded as prior art by the patent office, and that's a problem. And you know, then there's all of these other things related to inventions, but like, you know, ultimately, I mean, for people who are worried about overbroad patents on cannabis plants, there really is in the United States just one patent family that is questionably overbroad. And the remainder of the really questionable patents have to do with formulations, they have to do with products, they have to do with teas, they have to do with, you know, a t-shirt. There's a design patent on a t-shirt that has the number 23 on it with cannabis leaves inside of it. So like now nobody else can make the 23 cannabis leaf t-shirt. Like, who the fuck knows? Like, so there's a lot of stuff in there that really is questionable, but the good news is that like it's not really related to plants, but that does then for us like open up this whole other series of questions, which is like, well, wait a second, if we have all these other weirdo patents that are coming through, like what other kinds of data and documentation do we need to collect to help show that like, you know, that these patents maybe shouldn't exist?
So the other, I had a follow-up question. Now I forget what it was. Oh, so actually, when I worked at the aquaponic source, I helped write the patent for an aquaponic system that incorporated a waterfall. Like, which is, you know, how bullshit is that as far as like just overly broad, so that, you know, but then, you know, you also had on the other end of it, I mean, look at what happened with GW with Epidiolex. Like, come on, the whole CBD thing. Well, there's government funded published research from 1942 talking about CBD isolation for use in medical application. So how are they going to go say that? You know, especially for CBD isolate even. CBD isolate was actually first used in a medical trial, and I think it was 44 or 45, right at the end of World War II. So how are you, you know, that's just completely ludicrous to say that 200 milligrams of CBD. And do you want to talk about that? Because they actually lost the vast majority of that patent filing.
Yeah, their patent scope has been knocked back some, and that's another one of the things that's encouraging. It can be frustrating to see people getting broad patents, but, and this is where I think I started earlier when I said the system isn't perfect, but the system does work. There are some checks and balances in the system where people can, they can, when they get sued or when they're concerned about a patent, there are some things that you can do. You can mount a defense that argues that the patent is invalid. There are some post-grant review processes to challenge the scope of a patent. And so, definitely not in all cases, but in some cases, when a patent is too broad or when someone sues for patent infringement, you know, there are some answers for that. And so, it's encouraging to see that in some of these cases, there are some corrections happening. I think that if anybody ever does get sued on those super broad plant-related patents, you'll see the cannabis community mobilizing, and some expert will step forward and make some arguments about some of this, you know, the cultivation practices and some of the challenges with the way that those were claimed. My guess is that might be why people aren't getting sued on those patents. That even the patent owners are aware of some of the weaknesses of those claims.
Well,
But,
can it be as simple as DNA?
Not when you're talking chemo.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you got a strain, I know we're arguing about whether somebody keeps it up to a certain quality or whatever, but if you have a strain that you develop, like you take two and you actually develop a strain that is your own, and you know it's your own, wouldn't DNA alone conclude that that is your strain, and therefore you could prove or disprove whether somebody copied it? Yeah, wouldn't that, or is that a whole nother field, or way out there? And I mean, I've been wanting to ask that for a while, and I felt like you just gave me an opening to throw that back in there.
Okay, absolutely. If you were accused of infringing a plant patent and you knew that you hadn't copied someone's patent, you could do a DNA test and you have a bulletproof defense that you were not guilty of copying their plant, because a plant patent, that first type of patent that I was talking about is only about, you can make a direct clonal copy, and so it would take a DNA. If it doesn't match the DNA, it wouldn't infringe. On the other hand, these utility patents that we're talking about, you don't have to be genetically identical to infringe. If you meet the requirements of their claims, which might be, okay, you've got this much CBD, this much THC, this terpene profile, but not this much myrcene. It doesn't matter what your genotype is, as long as you've got these other characteristics, then if their patent is valid, you're in trouble. Now, a lot of people believe their patents aren't valid, so that's another issue. But your genotype wouldn't matter at all if that patent is valid.
Well, thanks, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, because I know we've been basically talking about mostly utility patents, which is what you said was the real hardship of the industry. But that's been bothering me all night about why can't we simply, take care of it with DNA, and you gave a nice explanation for that.
And the other piece of that, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, do you want to touch on that? You're probably going to say this, but do you want to touch on why that's important to get things genetically certified and genetic certification?
I actually was going to talk about sort of the, it's something related, but I mean, I think it is important for you, if you're really curious about what your cannabis plant is, it's a great idea to get it genetically tested. I think that one of the challenges that we see from just sort of like the overall data landscape is that, there's variations between labs, and different people are going to be doing different types of sequencing and different types of genetic testing. They all have slightly different, I can't remember what the exact words are called, but there's samples that you have that you're testing. Say what?
Benchmarks.
Something like, yeah, like benchmarks. Like there's benchmarks that you're testing against, and every genetics company has a different set of benchmarks, right? And so you end up with a situation where it's like, cool, like you can genetically test your strain, your cultivar, and you can have that kind of documentation available to you. But if we're looking at genetic readings from two different labs, we may not be able to compare apples to apples. And Dale, I'd love your take on this, but this is basically my understanding. And so I think that really the place where, like, well, one, I think that testing your genetics is really important because it's important to know what you're working with, and we have such a deficit of scientific knowledge because of prohibition that it is just imperative that we collect and share this data. And this is part of, another reason why I'm really passionate about the work that we're doing. But it is important. But like, I think that ultimately, like, if you were in a situation where, somebody, you think you have plant A and you're pretty sure that somebody is using your plant A and, to do something, or they're selling your clones without your permission, then you're going to want to test plant A and plant B, which might be plant A, probably at the same lab, so that you can see that the results are consistent. So, it's important, one of the things that is important from just like a prior art documentation perspective, from my understanding, is that it's a great idea to get some kind of timestamp report from a lab or another authoritative source about what plant material is, so that you can have that record in the case of infringement. But it's also important to note that, like, just genotype, just getting like a genetic test for your strains isn't necessarily enough in and of itself to fully like prevent the patent. it's an important piece of documentation in an overall process, but it is not in and of itself like, you know, some kind of foolproof protection. And part of that comes down to is like the other thing that relates to is, you know, the patent claims that we see come through. And ultimately, again, like when we're talking about a patent examiner and their role with a patent, we're really talking about them like looking at all of the claims that are listed in a patent and then looking for things that are similar or different. The main potentially overbroad patent family that's out there, the Biotech Institute LLC patents, you know, each of them, or at least a few of them, they only have one little tiny piece of that patent that's related to genetics. And I can't remember exactly what it is at this particular moment. But so what they're looking for is something that has, you know, I guess claim one of 9095554 is, you know, any hybrid cannabis plant with at least, you know, 3% CBD, a 1% terpene ratio, and then this list of terpenes of which myrcene is not the most dominant. So, you know, the genetic information becomes useful in looking for the one set of alleles that are present within the patent, but then the rest of it is not applicable, right? And so I wish that I could say that it's as simple as just, you know, genetically testing things and being like, yeah, stamp, approval, this is mine. But it's a little bit more complicated.
Well, I think that part of that is the fact that where is the database? There's not really a database. And where are the benchmarks? So we talked about that, that's what it would take, but nobody really has that database to make those comparisons.
That's right.
That has to be built. The benchmarks are not there. I mean, that's a good way to start, though. You have to have benchmarks, and then you build the database. So, yeah, yeah.
Right, and ultimately, I think that this is like a big piece of what we are really interested in doing, right? Is like, it would be amazing, like, okay, Data Nerd Beth is about to come out, but like, it would be amazing to be able to have a bunch of different sequence data from a bunch of different labs all together in a place where we could actually compare all of these different bits of data and be able to do like really smart analysis about like what is what. Like, I really think that we need to get there. And really, I think that the basis of, you know, what we're trying to build with the Open Cannabis Project is exactly something like that. And then the question becomes like, you know, again, our goal is to keep, you know, cannabis available and free and open, especially to the people who have built this industry. So then the question is like, should that data be fully open source? Should that data be fully available for anyone to do exactly what they want with? I mean, I think it needs to be public. I think that people need to access it, but like, is the community okay with your data being shared in a way that is so open that anyone can use it and then put it into their proprietary product for their own data analysis, etc. But all that to say, I think that you're totally right on. I think that that's exactly a piece of the puzzle that we need to figure out. And part of what I want to know is, how do we do this in a way that is not just like giving away information that people don't actually really want to give away, right? Like, how do we do that? And how do we do that in an ethical and open way?
On that note, I think you were, I'm not sure how you were involved, but I know you were at least partially, or talked to people over at Phylos. Do you want to talk a little bit about what they, you know, their whole project and what they've done at least to help try and build some of that database to where it is now? And I know there's a lot of wacky rumors. I think I even heard one out there that they were bought by Hawthorne. That is not true.
Rumors. What are you talking about? There's no
Like,
rumors.
yeah, so I actually went with one of the head people from Phylos was actually at the Regenerative conference, and I asked him point blank, and he was like, no, absolutely, that is not the case. There's a lot of ridiculous rumors out there. So I just wanted to say that, and you know, hey, they're not owned by Hawthorne or anything wacky like that. So you know, for anyone that's heard any of the wacky stuff. So I'll let you talk about that. They've done a lot of cool work to help map out a lot of the different stuff and you know, give us at least some starting point.
Yeah, and I think that we absolutely, you know, at least within my role, it's important to give some kudos to Phylos for that, because, you know, it's really easy to, you know, criticize work that people have done. But I would argue that also when you're the first person to do something, you're going to probably not do it exactly right. And, you know, but what we have from Phylos is really a starting point of open data to look at with regards to these cannabis plants. And I think that, you know, that is something that they did on their own. Is like they were like, we are going to make this information open source. We're going to make it available to the public, in part because we do need to have better transparency around how all of this works. And I think that that's really great. So now some of the questions that people are asking based on that are around like, okay, well, so the genetic and, you know, most of the genetic information that we have on Open Cannabis Project has come from Phylos. They are like, you know, like C-Pill has open sourced a little bit of data, Nolan Kane has open sourced a little bit of data, but Phylos has really led the way with this. And so like that, and to me, that's really commendable. You know, some of the questions that come up are around like, okay, well, how useful is the data? And the reason that people are asking those questions has to do with the fact that the data is SNPs. And so actually, so for people who are like nervous about someone being able to take their genetic data from Phylos and then like 3D printing a plant, like that's literally impossible. One, because of just like technology limitations, but also two, because the genetic data that is present there is SNPs. It's like pieces. If you can imagine, it's like, you know, you've got this like long piece of genetic code, and it's like a piece from here, and a piece from here, and a piece from here, and a piece from here. And, you know, within the sort of like Galaxy ecosystem, from what I understand, you know, that really helps to sort of create sort of a relational system around that data. But it's not like a full 100% genetic sequence of the data. If you did want to go down the route of saying like, okay, I want to, you know, sequence my information, and I want for that sequence information to be like basically my like barcode or blueprint about my plants, then you would want to go for something that did not use SNPs. You would want to go for something that used like a really full sequencing kind of platform to do that, which from what I understand is a bit more expensive and a bit more, like there's more to it, and I would definitely want to leave geneticists and people who are actually doing that kind of genetic analysis to talk about those specifics, because it is outside of my realm of like full 100% understanding. But what I think so, but you know, to start the process of saying like, hey, this is what we have, this is what we know that we have. We want for the public to know this. We want for breeders and growers to know this. I think it's a really commendable place to start. And again, you know, with all of these processes, you know, whoever does something first is going to fuck something up, right? Like whoever does something first, like whether it is, you know, you can think about like early sneakers, you know what I mean? Like, or like, you know, Converse and Keds and that kind of stuff.
Oh, come on, early Converse. No, come on now. Don't
okay, that's fair. But you know, if you're somebody who's like, well, wait a second, sneakers really need to have arch support, then you're going to be like, well, Converse, WTF, everything's super flat. Like, what's going on? You know, but like we start, as with any kind of innovation, you know, we start with one thing and then we like keep on building it. And part of what's really important and exciting about open information is that it makes it possible for anybody to be able to build with it. And I think the main thing that's really problematic when it comes to cannabis is that, you know, cannabis and genetic data and sequencing data is that, like, you know, we don't have great open source. Hi. Oh, hello. I see what you're doing there. I'm just wearing socks, so I have nothing to come back with right now. No, it's okay. But it's like, you know, like with open information and getting information into the, oh gosh, now I've lost my train of thought. Damn it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Flat shoe versus art shoes.
Yeah, I mean,
it keeps growing and evolving.
Right, and like we're all like building on top of this stuff, and ultimately I think that like this is where, well, okay, so two things. One is open source genetic information works best in an idealistic sense in a situation where growers and breeders like you have the same analytics tools that a company like Phylos Bioscience has. When you also have the ability to do analysis on that data in the same way that a for-profit company can, then that is when that information is the most beneficial to you. And so then that speaks to a need for maybe having more open source genetic analysis tools at our disposal so that, you know, you can actually do that analysis on your own. And that information is empowering to you versus just being like, okay, now it's out in the open, but only experts can really know how to deal with it. So what do I do with that? And then the other piece of that is that, you know, one of the things that, like, part of what I like about innovation and technology development and plant development and all of these things is the idea of, you know, we're all building on each other's shoulders. Like we're all pulling on knowledge and information that came from the past. And part of where I have a really big problem with where things are at within the cannabis industry, and that this is true for both intellectual property and just for the greater regulatory schema, is that there's a whole group of people who are like, oh yeah, this is new. This is totally new. Like we know what's going on, and it completely writes out all of these people whose shoulders they are in fact standing on. And that is just BS to me. And that is the piece of the equation that we really need to change. And that's really the piece of the equation that I'm interested in changing, and that I'm pretty sure that my board at Open Cannabis Project is really interested in changing as well. So I hope I answered your question. I kind of went on a rant, but yeah,
We love it.
welcome.
You're the guest. You're supposed to rant.
Good.
I don't want to take up y'all's entire evening here. Is there anything you guys wanted to kind of say in conclusion here, Dale or Beth, as far as what people need to know, and then I definitely want Dale to let everybody know how to find out how to reach him and his services. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I know you don't often, especially as a lawyer, don't share all your level of knowledge. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and educate us all and help everyone better understand how to even approach using someone like yourself when the time comes on their own farm.
Dale, you go first. I'm eating cauliflower.
Well, let's see. Where's my microphone? Here it is. Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Here we go.
No,
Okay. No, it was nice talking with you all, and nice to meet you. I hope to see you in person at one of these upcoming meetings. And if you want to get in touch with me, my website for my law firm is Plant and Planet. That's the name of my firm, Plant and Planet. And my blog is easy enough. It's plantlaw.com. So you can find me in one of the places, plantandplanet.com or plantlaw.com. And then the website that is updated every week with MJ Patents is mjpatentsweekly.com. So any of those sites. I do hope to meet you all in person someday. Thanks.
Are you coming to Ann Arbor?
All right.
Oh, well, okay.
Oh,
I think
did
he
he
had
turn off? Damn it.
That's
Yeah,
all right.
he made a statement and goodbye.
He's like, you know what?
Yeah.
It's time for tequila. No,
Yeah.
I'm bummed because I don't think that we are going to be in Ann Arbor. I would love to go, but I don't think it's going to happen. However, I think that, one of the things that we are really committed to this year, 2019 is the year of big questions. And for me, the most important thing is holding discussions just like the one that we had today, probably doing things that are even more directed and sort of a workshop format that really are more about people working together to figure out solutions that really work for them and their use case. And so I would encourage people, if you're interested in being parts of these conversations, sign up for our newsletter. Go to opencannabisproject.org and get involved and sign up for our newsletter there. I'll be speaking in Eugene, Oregon at, I can't remember the name of this really cute gardening shop, but I'll be speaking in Eugene, Oregon on Saturday. I'll be at the NOCO 6 Hemp Expo in Denver at the end of the month. And so I just really encourage people to, if you have thoughts, send me your thoughts. If you want to have a discussion, get in touch with me. The whole point of all of this is to really figure out systems that really work well for the cannabis community. And I can't do that without you. So be loud, get in touch, and get involved. I am really excited about building better legal and data sharing tools with everybody.
I think it's super exciting, and the way that you compare the data and open source data, like the way Joe Rogan talks about it in his podcast, and then you compare that to the plant world and how right now it's just blowing up everywhere, especially Canada and Michigan. I'm in Michigan myself, and there's just so many new people breeding and doing so many new things. The tissue culture also is very interesting to me, and we didn't get into the preservation of that.
Yeah, we didn't get into that. Yeah.
But I look forward to talking about that more, and Hey, there's Dave back.
Hey, Dale.
We're just getting ready to talk tissue culture, man. We're missing
Oh,
it.
good. Yeah, we wanted to talk about the tissue culture. We never talked about the tissue culture.
That's
I
all
was
right.
just trying to mute and I didn't know the hang up button. Sorry,
Oh, you're fine.
I'm back.
I did that earlier. Well, I feel like we could have a whole other podcast on tissue culture. So that's like
Why
a
don't we do
whole-
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll have
I
to,
know.
we'll get them back on again so that we don't eat up their whole evening.
Yeah.
I appreciate everyone's time. So, yeah. So why don't you tell everyone how they can support Open Cannabis Project and what you guys do, and how they could reach you if they want to get involved, and kind of what you can offer them, in closing.
Sure. So what I'm hoping to, so if you want to get in touch with me, go to info@opencannabisproject.org. That goes to me, as does Beth at opencannabisproject.org. And any other email for Open Cannabis Project probably goes to me right now. So just send me an email. You can follow us on Instagram at Open Cannabis Project. That's really the platform where we're the most active. And, I think that what we are really looking for right now and where people can really help out are we're looking for opportunities to have discussions like this, either online through webinar or in person, like with your group or with like a group of farmers and breeders, to really help to like identify like what these needs are. So, we're putting to, some people have suggested like you should go on tour and do a bunch of workshops on tour, and like that could be cool. We could also do a lot of this work online. That could be cool as well. But if you have thoughts about this and about, you're like, no, this is exactly what I want for licensing. I've already thought about this. Like, send me your thoughts. I'm super happy to get involved. Have you get involved that way. And also, if you have an opportunity for us to come to your conference to speak to your growers association, please get in touch with me. Like, these are exactly the kinds of conversations that we're really looking to have, and we're really looking to use having these conversations as a way to put together licenses and other tools that are really meant to put the ownership and really meant to put the agency back in the hands of farmers and breeders, who I think through regulations have had a lot of that agency kind of taken from them in ways that are unfortunate. So yeah, get in touch. Let's talk. Let's figure it out. That's what this whole year is all about.
Awesome. I appreciate it so much. It was so wonderful to have you guys on tonight. I know it's often a controversial topic, patents, and you guys really broke it down in a way that made it easy for everyone to understand, and to understand why it is that they would want to do that for their own grow, and how it actually might be a benefit to them, and something that they were kind of afraid of or against before. And I know after hearing your talk, you totally converted me, so that's why I wanted to bring you on. So I really do appreciate it.
The story, yeah.
So,
well, thanks you guys. I really respect what y'all do in a really major way. So thank you for making really great herb, and for attending to the earth, and for being awesome. And I just want to do what we can do to help protect that.
Amen.
Awesome. Oh, she hit the wrong button. That's okay. Thanks a lot, Dale, as well, for coming on and taking the time to talk to us and educate us all. And the link for both of their info is in the description of the video. And if you're listening to the audio format, you can find the info that way as well in the description, no matter where you're listening to it. So I really appreciate it. And I do apologize for the audio issues again. YouTube totally sprung a major change on how they host the whole thing, so I'm now running it through OBS, which has caused me a whole bunch of issues that I was not anticipating having to deal with today. But thankfully, I used to do a lot of video game streaming on Twitch, so I was able to slap something together in about 45 minutes that functioned well enough for us to have a show tonight and still get it recorded. So I appreciate everyone's patience. So thanks again, and you guys are welcome to take off if you want, or you're welcome to stay and listen to. We'll go on for about another half hour talking about our grows, and then we'll close up. So, but I appreciate you guys coming on.
Very awesome. And I put a bunch of links in chat for the Instagram for Open Cannabis Project, planetandplanet.com for Dave, and anybody that threw out.
Dale. His name is Dale.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm very sorry. But yeah,
It's cool.
I went ahead and just threw some links in chat, so if anybody
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thanks y'all. It's been a wonderful evening. I'm gonna hop off, but have a great night, and I'll hopefully talk to all of y'all soon.
Cool.
Look
Appreciate
forward
it.
to it.
Thanks again.
Have a
You're
great
welcome
time.
anytime.
Thank
We'll
you
have to
too.
get you back on again in a little bit and update everyone again.
You got it, man. I'm here.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
So, Malik, how have you been? What's up with your grow and what's new with you?
You know, I went through a little bit of struggles with my health, but then I'm back from that now, doing very well. Just really sticking with like herbal remedies. Steve, we were talking a little bit on DM about what happened. You know, I back in 2009 I broke some bones, femur, ribs, shoulder, punctured lung, ACL reconstruction. We all have pains. We've all been through hard, you know, we've all been through stuff. But instead of using opiates, I used cannabis, and that's what started me in this whole YouTube journey and getting my dog, the Boston Terrier, you know, the extra support, of course. So, but then, you know, for a little bit there, I was using the kratom, and then I tried using herbal tea, which actually caused me more stomach issues. But now I'm doing great, and I'm back into the YouTube scene, putting content out. Very happy and excited to be on the panel today, and just I was trying to get on last week when Kevin Jordy was on, but man, I seen him going off, dropping the knowledge, and I was like, I'm not gonna go in halfway through and interrupt him, man. I'll just let him go, and I'll just jump in the next following weeks because Steve's so kind. He shares the link every week to me, and it's just so. My
You should
grow.
have jumped in though. You should have jumped in so you could ask him a question, man.
I know. He was so cool.
He was so cool. He was so down to earth.
Dude, his micronized sulfur information just
Yeah.
on the one upload saved me $15,000 maybe. Like, not to throw numbers out there, but like the micronized sulfur as an IPM is a big one for me. I really love it. Not to mention, I noticed a few new companies. I don't know if it was Dragonfly Earth Medicine or somebody using micronized sulfur or like some type of sulfur foliar, you know, like a mixture. So that was pretty cool. But for my grow, I'm just using Timber grow lights, Vero 29 diodes, it's a LED, and then the Fluence Bioengineering Spider X's, and then just a little bit of HPS here and there just to maintain some other veg areas, and you know, just doing the best I can do over here in Michigan. I can't believe how big things are getting in Michigan. In a 20 square mile area, anywhere in mid-Michigan, you got 10 dispensaries and 10 grow shops. Like and they all need seeds. The demand for clones is high. So I'm just enjoying.
Wow.
Yeah, everything's really popping off. Wild. Oh, I'm right by Flint, Michigan. You know, my water's okay, so we're all right. I got low water. But I'm not gonna rant much longer. Thank you again for having me, Steve, Ponics, and Roger, and everybody, Mr. Green. Man.
Yeah, but what about don't you breed?
Yeah, I run a company.
Talk about your new genetics or what are you doing or something?
Yeah, real quick. I'll drop real quick. I run a small LLC called Dank Breeds LLC, and I built a group of guys called the Fire Squad, and it's probably like 30 or 40 guys across internationally, mostly Canada and the U.S. And they do a lot of my testing, or they do a lot of the testing, and they do breeding projects themselves together. And it's really when I was working when I was working with Subcool doing the Weed Nerd live show, he was the one who encouraged me to get my own LLC going.
Yeah, LLC, yeah. Definitely.
Yep, so I got that going, and then I haven't really applied that much, but I did build dankbreeds.com, a website, which we're constantly upgrading, and we're doing just small craft, transparent projects. You know, just basically I built this Dank Breeds and Fire Squad, and it's just such a good group of nice guys, just like you guys, that I would love to use it for anything they want to use it for, to further themselves in marketing or possibly make a little money or anything they want to do. Have fun, you know, like we do here. Have fun too. So that's just what I've been doing with the breeding. Strain specific wise, I've been working with a lot of 9-pound hammer on a 7-year-old cut from the first release that has Jack the Ripper dominant structure, but an OG nug structure. But it's a lighter lime green color with lighter orange hairs. And it is so stable that I took it out of flower at 3.5 weeks and set it in my bedroom, hoping it would nanner at 24-hour light. And it was in the 24-hour light for about 2.5 weeks. It did not nanner. I threw it back in flower, let her finish off. And now I'm trying to get it to reverse the silver thiosulfate, do a feminized project with it. And boy, I'm gonna have to up the dosage of the silver thiosulfate I'm using on her, because I've been growing her for years and I've never seen her nanner. And I've done one time the fan caught the trellis and just ripped off like 4 tops in the middle of week 4 of flower, and it didn't even flinch it.
Have you tried slamming the N?
What was that? What was that, Steve? I'm sorry.
Have you tried slamming the nitrogen in flower?
No, I have not tried that.
Yeah, try that.
I'll
It
do
might
it.
work. Something else was interesting.
Concept, I must say. Thank you, Steve. That's
Other stuff that makes the root grow too. So like,
Yeah.
I think that you know, like the vitamin B12.
Well, no. So vitamin B's actually can be very good for boosting flower as well, and making big buds, and accelerating the growth rate later on. Plants actually will actively use vitamin B pretty readily. Actually, you know, it's in some grow products, especially amino acids, that you'll see vitamin B on listed on the bottle.
Yes.
If you just repot the plant, or you know, trim the roots and stick new dirt underneath that, and you get the roots to grow again. So that's probably the best. You know, that's really helpful in getting a plant to regenerate. But it also sometimes makes a plant that's, you know, borderline hermaphrodite kick out hermaphrodite flowers too.
So something else I've noticed, particularly with CBD cultivars, is that they love to herm on 24 hours of light. The CBD heavy ones specifically. If I put them under 24 hours, I've noticed a much greater rate of herming. And I can even take a plant that's doing that and put it into like 18 hours of light, and it'll stop herming and it'll behave in a normal veg state.
Wow.
But I've only noticed that. I've only specifically noticed that with CBD cultivars.
That's very interesting.
The two that I've seen it strongly were equatorial CBD strains. So not something everyone's going to get their hands on, but it's something that I found really weird from just a stress standpoint, that it was freaking out about the 24 hours. And then as soon as I dropped it to 18 and gave it that, 6 hours at nighttime, it stopped doing it. Which to me was just weird. I thought it was really, there's some, you could, I don't know, there's more to it than that. You could do something with that. Anyways, we could learn something from
Very
that.
interesting.
So, anyways.
Because I always, a CBD, a windowsill purple CBD variety that's as a souvenir was always one of those ones that I knew would just fly off the shelves. Like, it would sell so good. And I see you doing something like that very soon.
Nice.
Just because you're working with the CBD so good.
Well, what's interesting is we've gotten really radically different profiles from aquaponic production versus soil. And something with the aquaponics is boosting the CBD specifically, along with THCV and total terpene profiles. So, I don't necessarily know if it's something that's going to translate. I know there's a guy out there, his name's Scott something or other, but he's out there making the claim right now that, fungal dominance increases CBD and bacterial dominance increases THC. Well, that might be the case with very specific scenarios, but I've done side-by-sides with DWC plants, or I haven't, but I've had clients that have done straight DWC or even media bed with no soil at all. So zero soil whatsoever. Even in the DWC, there's zero mycorrhizae. If it's straight in the water, there's no mycorrhizae on that plant. and it was beating
Right.
the control that was in soil for CBD level and side by sides. So,
Wow.
you know, clearly that yes, inducing fungal will increase total cannabinoid production for sure, but increasing biodiversity is actually the trigger. But it's not so much fungal versus bacterial, it's biodiversity. And then specifically with lignin producing plants, the more lignin production it has, the more woody it is, the more it will increase its growth from fungal dominance in this root zone. Now, for instance, um, uh, when we did fruit trees in aquaponics with the dual root zone, we did various depths of the roots for the soil layers, and we noticed the deeper ones had much better growth on the woodier crops with the more fungal layer in there. And same thing with osha, for instance. We did osha, which is a very hard to grow medicinal herb that's traditionally only wild harvested or mainly wild harvested, at least to get good medicinal osha. It's something that I will do myself. I'll go find stuff that's falling in the side of the creek or whatever. So I'm not taking anything. I won't go dig stuff up, but I'll take what nature's presenting to harvest, which is an ethical way to harvest a plant that takes that long to grow. Just wait for the spring runoff, and you'll get plenty. Don't worry. But we were able to replicate that by introducing a soil that was very similar to where they came from in wicking bags, like smart pots, and then inoculating them with some mycorrhizae that I had gotten from a wild patch of osha, and inoculating them that way, and actually getting that to take in a semi-commercial aquaponic setup. And so you can actually do really cool stuff with that, especially with stuff that needs, osha root needs a very specific moisture level in the root zone for its mycorrhizae. That it needs that boosted moisture level that you can get kind of in a wicking bed. And that's where I learned a lot about, figured out a lot of this stuff with the, tinkering with that, because we realized there was something to the fungal stuff, but then it was, okay, well, is it the fungal stuff or is it just straight biodiversity? And in every test that I've done so far, it's just been straight biodiversity. The moment you diversify that, even without the presence of fungals, you're going to get an increase in cannabinoids either way. But it's not going to have any kind of expression difference between CBD and THC. And especially when you run something like a DWC run, there's zero mycorrhizae. And if that theory was correct, that would have a lower CBD level because it's 100% bacterial, or 99 whatever percent bacterial. I'm sure there's some kind of fungi in there.
So back to, since you brought up deep water, you kind of went full circle back to deep water culture. I just want to clarify for everybody. How did you do, or ask you a question, Steve? When you say deep water culture, I'm pretty sure you're talking about using aquaponics.
Yeah.
The same. All right, now, so in your deep water, how do you build your deep water culture system? Are you using buckets or are you using a trough? Or
no, this was all in troughs with rafts. This was at a commercial facility.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
They just fill them up and they have their drainage level.
Yeah. So again, it's about biodiversity, and when you do the dual root zones setup, you're going to get at minimum 167% more biological diversity, and that number is based on a NASA study that they did, and I have this in my I talk about this in a couple of my presentations, that there's this, you get radically increase in biodiversity with the aquaponics, especially with the split root zone. You have your living soil above, your aquatic microbes below, and you're actually getting the maximum exposure that you can possibly healthily, in a healthy way, expose those plants to the widest variety of microbes. And when you do that, what do you cause? You cause the maximum expression of that plant trying to defend itself, or at least build antibodies against, or what would be equivalent to antibodies against all those. And what are those? Terpenes. It makes terpenes as a response to different things that might threaten the plant, which if you expose the root zone to more microbes, now it's got more things to use as a basis for making, as examples for the defenses. So when you increase your terpenes, you're also increasing your cannabinoids, because what are cannabinoids? They're a terpene plus a phenol. So when you actually increase the biodiversity of the root system, you're going to increase the terpenes, you're going to increase your total cannabinoids. So that's the reason why, you know, dual root zone aquaponics actually will give you higher terpene numbers than pretty much anything else you can do, even living soil, because you're getting all the benefits of both worlds. You could even do large pots, do it no-till, and run them for years, you know, and still get all the benefits. Yes, you're not directly connected to the ground, but that's really just a hippie bullshit excuse, to be honest with you. The water is still connected to the earth. The thing's sitting on the ground. You know, that doesn't make any sense. You know, if you really want to connect it, whatever, you can run a wire. I know, was it Wade Lauder's done a bunch of side-by-sides and a bunch of research with that, or Wade Lauder's done a lot of research with that. The guy at Harlequin, and we talked about him earlier, about what happened with Charlotte's Web. But
Right.
so that's actually the reason why aquaponics can give you superior cannabis, and you know, when you break it down and think about it in that way, it's obvious, you know, it's super obvious why it works so much better. But you know, people do a bad job of explaining it,
Yeah, this is one that even I don't understand fully, and I need to be fully educated on how it is superior. You know, I'm understanding a little bit as you're telling me, but I'm not soaking it all in. But over time, I want to understand.
So you have a dual root zone pot, and the top half has your soil, and you have a layer of burlap, and then the bottom half is your flood and drain hydrogen or lava rock. So the bottom half is flooding and draining with your aquatic microbes and acting like a diaphragm to increase your gas exchange in both the bottom half and the upper half. Because if it's in a pot, it's going to function like a piston, and it's going to force that air up through that soil zone. And that when you do that, the fungi and everything rapidly increase in growth rate. The bacteria, the rotifers, the amoebas, all the different creatures that make, you know, microarthropods, that increased oxygen level makes them grow faster, and makes them replicate faster, and they're all happier faster. There's more food, everything gets rocket. I just posted a picture on my Instagram before the show of a ridiculously healthy dual root zone pot. You know, it's just teeming with fungi. It's ludicrous.
Check that out.
And that was inoculated, you know, a little over a week ago, which is insane considering it's basically a flat mat of white. So how quickly it's colonizing with some of this newer lab, experimenting with some different lactobacillus species for making labs, and coming up with some really cool results along with a couple of different inputs, but trying to come up with trying to make it easier for people. I know labs are really awesome, but it's a little bit complicated. There you go. Malik's got it up. So this is the picture I was referring to. Yeah, there you go. You can see.
Dual root zone. Wow, look at all that fungus and.
Yeah. So imagine if there was like Pythium or some nasty root issue that came in there. How's that going to even attempt to survive that? Like, it's just going to be completely dominated.
Exactly.
So that's you know, that's kind of the thing where, you know, when you go probiotically, you don't really have to worry about bad pathogens, because you have an army ready to take on anything that even hits the soil. If anything even tries to contaminate anything, you know, it's just being completely outcompeted and can't even, you know, remotely have a chance of establishing itself. So that's something that I'm trying to streamline. I'm trying to make it much faster for you guys to make labs. Labs are really awesome. It's a wonderful thing, but it takes a long time. It's annoying to try and collect the yeast in the air and all that. You know, it's kind of tedious, especially for people that don't know. So I'm working on a couple of formulations that will streamline that and make it much easier.
Okay.
And
You
make
think
it much
for
faster.
the blind lab to be tedious? Because really.
To me, it's a lot of steps, and I'm working on ways to. Yeah, so I'm working on what. Well, not only that, so I cut down the time to like 3 to 5 days for a commercial batch rather than that 2 weeks.
Oh wow.
So it's a lot faster.
That's gonna be.
So
That's
especially
if you're doing
commercial yeah, it is. If it's gonna, you know, if we're doing commercial batches and stuff, you want to speed everything up. You know, you don't have time. You know, it's a lot of physical space. If I have a large vessel that's kept up for 2 weeks, that's a lot of physical space that and a square footage that is now not generating cash for me right now. So I want to be able to use those brewers for making ferments, but I want to be able to use it quickly, make that ferment, and then move on to making the next one and just store it, stabilize and store it, because lab stabilizes pretty well. You can make a batch every 3 to 6 months and then move on. So I want to be able to run FPGAs. I want to be able to run other things in those fermenters. So by able to accelerating the labs and then making it more accessible to people, I think it's going to make it something people use a lot more. And like Kevin was talking about last week, how Alan from Grokashi and Probiotic Farmers Group, he was one of the guys to first discover the using the lactobacillus stuff for cleaning up the viruses. And then when they had the new Cambrian layer breaking up, taking the clean cones off of that, and then they would not, the majority of them would not, when not stressed, would not express that viral expression, and they would actually just grow fine. So they were able to clean up their genetics by doing that multiple times and reducing that viral load each time. They could, do that, until it was clean, or, as close as you could get.
Yeah.
But part of the lactobacillus is collecting the bacteria, so if you try, and it takes time to do that, so if you start speeding it up, so I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Right, but what if I gave you?
You've got a fucking great idea.
What if
I'm just going to fuck with you. I'm sorry, but I'm going to mess with you.
What if I gave you those bacteria and just was like, here, you add this to this, this to this, and go, rather than having to wait and do all that? If you just had a culture that you could just get, that you knew was awesome, that had had some testing behind it, that had some came from a company or a group that you already did a bunch of organic stuff.
That sounds as consumer, as commercial entity, I think that's great.
Well,
but
and the other thing is,
or a home grower, or somebody with their own private little micro farm, they would need to produce their own, because
and you'd be able to.
The complication. See, you say it's uncomplicated. So in a commercial a venue, I can see it's uncomplicated, but for somebody small, it's not uncomplicated. You have to order it, you have to pay for it, you have to get it, and then it's not indigenous to your bacteria in your area.
Well, it's more of a methodology. Anyone could copy it and not have to buy the thing. Like it's no different than like dual root zone. Like,
right.
It's a concept that works, that you could replicate on your own with your local resources. It's just it's also a lot easier too if people can just go buy something off the shelf, especially for a commercial producer where everything has to be certified and signed off on by the state and all this other happy horse shit. So by having something that you can run through that and eventually get certified, maybe not now, but put it in the pipeline so that it could get approval with all these states that are requiring whitelisted products for all their stuff. That you gotta you're pretty much pigeonholed into doing this if you're gonna get it up there, because even if you teach people that, there still has to be that research behind it in order for them to even be able to use it, even if they aren't buying it from you. So that's kind of where this is going. We have 2 different versions that'll hopefully see the light of day by the end of the year. But yeah, as soon as I'm happy with this, a little bit longer, we'll I'll release it and let everybody know. I'll do a YouTube video on it and everything, but at least for a little bit longer while we test it, I'm going to keep it under wraps, at least for now. But yeah, it's really cool. Talking to Chris Trump about it a little bit earlier and what his thoughts were on it. I think we'll probably talk about it on the panel that we'll do at Michigan. Yeah. So actually, I was going to ask you, Malik, are you going to be in Ann Arbor at the conference?
How many days we got? How many days do we have until the conference?
It's the 22nd through the 24th.
24th, which is about 9 or 10 days.
Yeah, it's in Ann Arbor.
At Grow Green.
I may have a few appointments around that time.
Sure.
But if I can make it, I will. Dude, I don't want to miss a chance to come hang out and meet you guys. You know what I'm saying? So if there's one day that I can make it, I'll make it.
Well, there's evening tickets where you after the conference, like the speakers speak.
Yeah.
You're gonna still be there. They like $25.
If you come down,
25.
No, if you
Is
come.
it selling out? Like
No.
Ahead of time, or have to show right up?
I got you. Just yeah, panelists. I got you. Don't worry about the ticket. We got you. So
Yeah, I'll bring a lot of money with me. I'll bring a lot of money with me anyway. But yes.
So
Thank you so
Sunday
much.
Sunday is
Yeah,
the most useful. Not counting the information or speakers. Sunday is a very useful day because of the seed swap.
Yep.
So
The breeder panel.
Oh wow, really?
yeah.
So I could just
Yep.
bring a bunch of stuff to hand out or
Yep.
just hand out or.
Collect.
Oh
Everyone-
man, I gotta get over there. Yeah, I'll make it one day. I'll make it one day. I gotta see my appointment schedule, but just 'cause I have a few little doctor appointments. But yes, expect. I can't pass up the opportunity to come meet the man himself. Come on, guys, the men themselves.
Well, it'd be nice to have you too, because I loved. I never got in contact with you after the last show, and I was jealous of all the genetics you were sharing. But
Just let me know.
if you come on Sunday with the breeder of the seed swap and breeder panel, you'd fit right in.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Sunday would be the 24th, so I'm gonna make sure the
And
24th.
Kevin Jodry is the guy that put the breeders.
Oh yeah, the 24th I am free, so yeah, I'll be there.
I know how to close.
I suddenly became free.
I just seen my calendar like photographic memory, and then yes, it clicked. So
Yeah. If you
the coconut capsules I ate earlier were maybe getting me a little stony. So
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely be worth your while since you got something to offer too.
Yep. So what about you, Mr. Green Jeans? What's new with you and your garden?
Not much. Same old thing. I've grown myself into the corner. Got no room left. 3 cherry bomb plants just killed me.
overgrow. That's
Overgrow, yeah. Terrible.
You killed me with that cherry bomb. You gotta give me some cherry bomb.
Kind of like a growth decelerator or something like that. A cannabis, something that makes cannabis grow slower.
Yeah, that's
You know,
all these other guys, they just naturally, that happens to them. But us, we have the opposite problem, eh?
yeah, it's terrible.
Especially pulling Ponics Steve here. This.
I can relate to that too. Ever since I learned it, when I decided to learn, let's say like a decade and a half ago, to do, because I got sick of trying to chase it, and so we decided to experiment, and I really went and did a lot of research and all, to figure it out. And you know what's funny? I went from doing research to being a moderator on the cannabis site, and now I've been a moderator for over 15 years. And it was because I went and read and learned. I found out who the hot people were, and then I followed what they said to do, how they grew and everything. And then I shared it with others, and we come to this point. There we go. Where we're all sitting here sharing all this information, and it's so open. I don't know. I kind of lost. I had another point to make, and I lost it. But here we go again.
I was with you. I
was gonna say on that note, it was really awesome to talk up in Portland because it was so alien to all these growers to come out in the open and talk about it. And I know like Kevin was saying last week with my friend who came up from Texas, he had never seen that many seeds before in his whole life. Like individual people there had more seeds than he had ever seen in his life, but that whole room collectively was like Disney World to him. But so what was really special was in Portland, that was like half the room. Half the room had never seen bags with 1,000 seeds before, or like sit like that. So that was like so wonderful to like expose people. And I thank Josh and Leighton so much for putting it on. To give people that experience, because that made people's day. There was people that were glowing, like floating out of that building.
I can't wait for this in Arbor. That would be crazy.
Yeah, so that was really cool, because on the West Coast, people, how long have people been doing seed swaps there, Mr. Green Jeans, in Cali, that you know of?
Oh, I don't know, forever. I mean, forever, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But
So it's been,
now, when I was growing on the
Okay.
East Coast, that allegedly, there was only 3 people on Earth that knew I grew. The other guy that occasionally helped me with the grow when I wasn't there, and was helping me out, and then 2 other people who each of us had figured out some other person in town that was a grower because they always had lots of keef and lots of bubble hash. And if you have lots of that kind of stuff, it's pretty obvious that you have access to a lot of plant material, so at a low cost, which means you're probably growing. So
that's true. I mean, there was a time when everybody was in the closet. You know what I mean? I mean,
yeah,
I guess really only since maybe the late '90s, the early 2000s has there been the really open, open seed swapping and stuff like here in Southern California. I mean, I'd like to think it was forever because for me, I mean, I didn't come here to California until the early '90s. And it was immediately like as if coming into coming into the true cannabis culture. Even then, from the still a real improvement in cannabis culture. Even though back in those days we were still pretty much in the closet. It wasn't until like late '90s, early 2000s that things started flowering out, and much more communication between growers and breeders and things like that. Yeah, it's been great. It just keeps getting better. It's where we're at now is amazing, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. Look at the guests on the show every week that are like 1/3 our age or half our age, and they are just building a new superstructure of, a network for cannabis legalization and databases and legalization and like tonight we had a lawyer that that has a real good idea about what's going on with genetics and all. So
This show is amazing.
yeah.
This podcast is incredible. I have a feeling it's going to be people are going to be watching the archives of it years from now. I mean, it's just.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was unmuted when I moved my chair there. I'm sorry, guys. It makes no sense.
Wow.
It happens.
Anyways,
Well,
I'm done.
you know,
I said my part. Cherry bomb. Yeah, I love my cherry bomb plants. Oh, and
Yeah, no cherry bomb.
I got.
I've had cherry bomb all the way over here in the Midwest.
See? Awesome.
Yeah, it is dang for sure.
Dutch sent me some pictures of some seeds for sale up there up there where he lives. Like he went into the local dispensary and took a picture of the seeds on the shelf. I was like, wow, the whole world is. It's great, man. I love it.
oh man, I
So-
just got a great taste out of whatever I'm smoking. I just got a great taste.
Cheers.
Nice.
I don't get it all the time. I'm not able to always capture the terpenes and all that taste, but every once in a while I'll take a bud and then it's like, oh yeah, that I just felt like I ate some grape juice, drank some grape juice.
So
We were just talking about that in the chat room, talking about the idea of crossing grapes with cannabis and getting grape flavored cannabis.
so
Yeah.
I'm suggesting just growing them next to each other because then maybe the cannabis will pick up the terpenes. Just me and Steve were talking about that one day.
Well, I would kind of have it when you got the great purple time things, the blueberries and all that. At different times, it tastes like berry, or it tastes like you go, is that like blueberry taste, or is that grape? I mean, it is interesting how that could happen. I mean, I love and again, I've told you guys many times on the show, I love that Beth was talking about, like retaining the older, classic. Now I know she was talking about, kind of seemed like they were talking about more of the clone only strains, the clone only strains are out there, but we also have all these other still seed, you still get seeds for certain strains, and I like the fact that they were into the older catalog. Let's just say call it the older part of the catalog. The strains have been around for a lot longer, and because I've been involved with, but I'm intrigued, and believe me, I wish I was somewhere where I could just grow a shitload of plants with open genetics, and like Josh loves to do. Josh is always talking about open pollination. He just throws it all out there and lets it go. And, the thing from you having Mr. Green Jeans having stable strains right up to how you like to throw out seeds to everybody so they can create something or find, like, isn't it you that likes to use that term, the unicorn?
Oh yeah,
I just last week I love it. I never heard that term before.
I think it was Kevin.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
somebody on our show said,
Kevin.
Who was that, Steve?
Kevin. It was Kevin.
Oh yeah, Kevin showed it because you find the unicorn.
Unicorn.
Yeah.
Well, see, some shit sticks in my head. I'm a little older than you guys, so some shit just got.
I think there's a couple strains already named unicorn piss or unicorn something or like
No, the best-
you already know there is.
But he was talking about when you go through 1,000 or 10,000 seeds,
Unicorn, yeah.
you find. He was talking about you go through 1,000 or 10,000.
Mhm.
Like you plant them all at the same time.
No, the best one in Emerald was Cokehead Slut. There's a strain called Cokehead Slut. It was like, I'm totally gonna be able to sell that to a soccer mom that comes in, or a little old lady that wants something to go to sleep. She's gonna buy Cokehead Slut, I'm sure.
Yeah. Right.
First choice.
One of the ones I like was Titty Sprinkles.
Titty sprinkles. Can you imagine trying to recommend some little old lady you need some titty sprinkles? Like, come on, guys, we got to get a little bit more adult with the names.
Oh, little
like,
old ladies
a
get
little bit more adult with the names.
Well, no, I'm going to stop right there. But,
Yeah, you better stop.
When I was younger, I might have said, anytime you get a woman's panties wet, then you're doing good.
Yeah, but that shouldn't be the name of your strain, though. Your strain shouldn't be called anytime you get your girl's panties wet. That should not be the strain name.
Right.
So,
we're gonna have a good time in a couple in 10 days, man. We're gonna have a good time.
So I'm running off I'll be off to Michigan, and then I'll be off to an undisclosed location, working on one of the new projects. I will not be able to film there, but I will hopefully be able to run down and film in a commercial aquaponics op. I'm trying to make it down to this one. I'm pretty close to before I leave where I'm at for quite a while. So and then I'll be off. We'll have some really cool stuff in April. We have the DGC Cup coming up, and then we also have I'll have some cool filming opportunities with some spots I'll be working with. I think you guys are gonna like the scale of what we're doing. It's gonna be kind of crazy compared to stuff I've had on the channel before, so it'll be pretty dope. So yeah, so that's all that's been new with me working on some.
Awesome. Shout out to Dude Grows Crew.
Hell yeah.
And weren't you the one that brought the insufferable, snortable THC powder?
Yeah.
Was that you?
Yeah.
That you?
Yeah, I was the one that brought the weed powder. So.
I just, I have these vague memories, and I'm like, that was Steve.
Yep.
Because
There's
the guy
a
he was
weird.
talking about it.
There's a weird strong weed product.
Yeah, too cool. I just had to bring it up.
If there's a strange, super potent weed product, I'm probably responsible.
Yes, sir.
Oh
Yes,
my.
I can't wait. Oh man.
Anybody that was at the Portland show had some new experimental stuff, and got to get super high off of a couple blunts that we rolled. So
Oh man.
that was pretty fun to show off some stuff that's not on not out in public yet. So.
Yes. I had a great time with you guys, man.
Oh yeah, and I'll see. Are you coming to the cup in April?
In Michigan here, the High Times Cup. Yeah.
No, the DGC Cup.
Oh, the DGC Cup. I'm not sure if I'm gonna make that one. I have to set up a irrigation system first to be able to go. But then yeah, if I can get the irrigation stuff in time, I'm coming.
Awesome. And cool. So do you want to tell? We'll wrap the show up. Do you want to tell? Oh, first off, I wanted to say, please go check out regenerativeorganiccannabis.com.
Yep.
March 22nd through 24th is the Science of Regenerative Organic Cannabis Conference. Josh from Dutch Blooms and Leighton from Kingdom Aquaponics put it together. We have Dr. Lane Ingham, Susan Wainwright Evans, Chris Trump, myself. We're going to be doing a panel, I think, on Friday night. You're going to see Chris and Elaine and myself and Susan and Wendy, and I'm not sure who else will be there. Leighton.
Chip Osborne.
Well, we're all going to be on a panel together on Friday night and get, which was really fun in Portland, where we got a chance to talk about everyone's perspectives. If Dragonfly's there, we'll try to drag them in. I don't know what day they're coming in. I know that they're flying back from Bali and coming straight to the conference. So,
Now, Steve, when you're talking about that panel in the evening, is that the evening ticket for $25?
Yep. So there's evening tickets
Well,
as
that's
well.
not bad. That's
You ought to
a good price.
explain that to
Yeah.
people that might be local, that, you know, because it's $125 per day or $299 for the 3 days, and you could come in an evening session, which is after the speakers, but a panel wherein people are hobnobbing and hanging out for $25.
Yep.
I like the hobnob.
And then Saturday, we have Chip Osborne as well, soil scientist, and then on Saturday we have Susan Wainwright Evans and we have Chris Trump talking. Susan Wainwright Evans she's going to come on the show. I don't have a date yet, but possibly the day right before the conference, on the 21st. We're talking about trying to maybe get her on. But she's probably the world's most knowledgeable person on insects in terms of cannabis.
She's the bug lady.
Yeah, and beneficial insects to use for bugs on your cannabis. So
And
you
if you Google
she's
the bug lady, you'll find her.
she's just super awesome. She also does a lot of work with animal shelters and stuff. So if you're ever wanting to thank her for her knowledge, go out and check out on her website. I think she has a link to the group she works with and rehabilitates cats. I have a avid cat owner as well. So if you ever want to thank her for her knowledge, go to her donation button over there, and it will go to her cat charity. So if you do, please, support that. She's invaluable. If you ever don't know an insect, you can send it to her. She prefers them in alcohol in a little vial, but you can also send her, really good pictures. Again, she probably can't ID them, but from a picture alone, but she can give you a good idea. I know I recently was running into a mite that I couldn't quite explain. And turns out it was just one that feeds on fungi, and you guys have seen the insane levels of fungi I have in my root zones, and turns out they were just feeding on it and not bothering the plant, not at all whatsoever, not even on the plant, but they're just present in the root zone, and it freaked me out because they looked like white spider mites. I couldn't identify them as anything that was negative, anything that would, any root mite or anything, but turns out they're just a harmless fungal feeding mite, and they're not hurting anything, so no reason to worry about them. Maybe just throw something to feed on them, but don't have to go crazy and purge the room or anything. So thank you so much for all the knowledge she does. I know she's working on a book as well, but if you ever have anything weird or anything unusual, put it in alcohol and send it to her, because she can actually ID it that way. She can dissect it, and she's actually done a lot of work with helping to identify the fact that traditionally you're told, for instance, thrips are Western flower thrips. They're not. They're onion thrips traditionally on your cannabis. And there's a second one. I forget what the other one is, but they're onion thrips and this other thrip, which is completely different, especially when you're talking about what's going to eat them. So this is the reason why properly identifying stuff and making sure you're getting good information on it is so critical, because you might think it's something and hit it with a beneficial that's not going to feed on it at all. Or very little, so that's why it's really important to know what you're doing. So that's what she brings. She does a 3-hour talk on all these different beneficial and pest insects, how to identify them, how to tell them apart, microscope video and stuff. It's really incredible. And then Chris Trump's is talking in the afternoon, and then I forget who else is in it. Dragonfly Earth Medicine is also in the afternoon.
Chris Trump is also doing a hands-on clinic, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I think we have. So I don't know if we're doing the workshops in Ann Arbor. I'm not sure. Josh could tell. I know the
We also
Dragonfly.
have Craig Johnson, Joshua Sunderland.
Yep. So they'll be there, and then Dragonfly Earth Medicine will be there as well. I think Dragonfly is going to be talking in the afternoon. on Saturday as well. And then we have the panel in the
Woody
evening.
Kronberg.
We have the panel in the evening hosted by Dragonfly Earth Medicine with other DemPure certified farmers, which is always awesome.
Right.
And then we'll have Kevin Jodry rocking it in the morning on Sunday, and then
Oh,
we'll have
whoa.
and then we'll have
I
the
can't
seed
miss
swap.
that.
We'll have the seed swap around lunchtime, and then we have lunch break, and then we go into Kevin Jodry hosts 2 separate breeders panels where he brings in a group of local breeders and then a group of breeders from around the country to come talk on breeding practices, what's going on with their grows, economic what's hot right now, tips and tricks that they've learned on the small scale and cottage scale growing. And how to manage the market, because these guys have got way more experience than all of us combined. I mean, you guys found that out firsthand last week with Kevin. So,
Absolutely.
when these guys talk, shut up and listen, because you'll learn a lot. I know when we were in Vancouver, Kevin was staying at our house. We had a Airbnb that had 80 bajillion bedrooms, and every night everyone was up till 4 or 5 listening to him. It was amazing. It was really cool to like just hang out with all the different speakers, hang out with Elaine, hang out with Dragonfly, hang out with everyone. It was just really cool. So, I love these conferences, and you get access to these people at the Regenerative conference. You can go, you want to go ask Elaine questions afterwards, go ask her. She's right there. She's hanging out all day. And she's there to answer, to be there for you. So, and then that's held in Ann Arbor, and come out in person. And if you can't make it, you can actually get a live stream ticket, and I'll be helping. I'll actually be running the majority of the live stream, except for the panel and my presentation that I'm participating in. We'll have asking questions, and if you want to ask a question on the thing, I'll raise my hand and ask the question for you, unless it's particularly ridiculous or I think someone else is going to ask it. Or I'll take the best 5 or 10 questions and I'll ask them. So you'll have that level of interactivity, with the live conference that you wouldn't normally have. So, and we actually have a professional filming team that I'll be working with that's been hired to run the stream. So we'll be able to cut to microscopes and stuff, and we'll be doing lots of different cool stuff with the video version that I'll be putting together, and I promise it'll be better than this. This was very last minute with the audio problems. I do apologize, but we'll get it sorted out by Thursday.
Regenerative Cannabis Cultivation Conference. This is going to be sick.
Yep. So it's called regenerativeorganiccannabis.com. And it's very affordable, especially when you look at the list of speakers and the amount of knowledge. Even for the seed swap alone, it's worth it. So even if you're not even trying to get knowledge, which you're silly if you're not. It's really worth taking the time, and it's kind of a wonderful group, and there's a lot of awesome things that have kind of come out of it. If you want to come talk to Dragonfly and talk to them about maybe getting a DemPure certification, how to get involved, they'll be there in person. Or if you want to come talk to Kevin about, marketing, if you want to come talk to Elaine about, some soils discovery or microscope picture you got, great. If you got some insects that you don't know what the hell they are, put them in alcohol and bring them for Susan. We'll have a microscope there. So,
wow, look at the website. It's so easy just to click it and go right to the live stream for Ann Arbor, Michigan. Very simple.
Exactly. Then you go to speakers. It's got speakers